Hey guys, tonight we are going to journey back in time, deep into our own origin story, to find the answer to a profound and unsettling question. What is the human body's secret superpower? Imagine, we are 3 million years in the past, standing on the dry, rust-colored earth of the Pliocene African savanna. The air is thick and hot, buzzing with insects you've never seen before. The sun is a relentless hammer in a vast, pale blue sky. Before you lies a sea of tall, golden grass, punctuated by the flat-topped silhouettes of acacia trees. In the distance, you can see herds of strange, three-toed horses and lumbering, elephant-like creatures with shovel-shaped tusks. The world feels enormous, ancient, and utterly indifferent to you. But in this overwhelming landscape, a small detail catches your eye. A family group moving nervously through the grass. They are small, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in hair, but they walk upright on 2 legs. This is your family. This is you. You are an Australopithecus afarensis, a distant ancestor. And as you scan the horizon, you are acutely aware that you are not the hunter here. You are the hunted. Over there, a pride of Dinophalis, a saber-toothed cat the size of a jaguar, watches from the shade of a rock outcropping. You can hear the whooping calls of giant hyenas, twice the size of their modern cousins, echoing from a ravine. You have no sharp claws. Your canine teeth are pathetically dull compared to theirs. You are slow, weak, and soft. Over the next 3 million years, this fragile creature will somehow claw its way up the food chain. It will outlast the saber-tooths and the giant hyenas. It will learn to hunt animals 10 times its own size. It will spread from this African cradle to every continent and every island on the planet, fundamentally reshaping the world in its image, becoming the undisputed apex predator of Earth. So what is the secret to this impossible success? How did this walking lunch buffet pull off the greatest coup in the history of life? And what hidden strength, what secret superpower, allowed our ancestors to not only survive, but to conquer? Thanks to a century of fossil discoveries and new forensic technologies, tonight we will venture into the deep past together to find the answers. Frankly, if you were dropped here without a time machine, your life expectancy would be measured in minutes, and your final moments would be a frantic, undignified scramble up a tree you couldn't quite climb fast enough. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your existence is a constant, humming thrum of anxiety. Every rustle in the grass, every shadow that flickers at the edge of your vision sends a jolt of adrenaline through your small frame. Your group survives on a mixture of vigilance and luck. You spend your days gathering roots, berries, insects, and whatever else you can find that won't fight back. Meat is a rare, intoxicating luxury, something you might get a few scraps of when you find a carcass that the real predators have already abandoned. The central question that scholars of prehistory have argued over for more than a century is how you made the leap from a terrified scavenger, to a master hunter. For a long time, the most popular answer was also the simplest. and, in its own way, the most brutal. It was the idea that, deep down, our secret wasn't cleverness or cooperation, but a unique capacity for violence. This was the killer ape hypothesis, a theory that proposed that what separated our ancestors from other apes was that we were the ones who picked up a bone, not as a tool, but as a club. It's a compelling narrative that we are the children of the first ape who chose to kill, and that this single act of aggression was the engine of our evolution, imprinting a permanent savage instinct into our DNA. This idea suggested our intelligence, our tool use, and our social structures were all just byproducts of our true calling as nature's most effective murderer. For much of the 20th century, this was the dominant theory, a dark and strangely flattering mirror held up to a species that was, at the time, grappling with the aftermath of 2 world wars. But as we will see, this story, however simple and dramatic, tells us far more about our modern fears and anxieties than it does about the reality of your life 3 million years ago on the vast and dangerous plains of Africa. The clues to our real superpower lie somewhere else entirely, hidden in the fossilized crime scenes of the ancient world. To understand where that dark, cinematic vision of our origins came from, you have to travel forward in time, from your precarious life in the Pliocene to the slightly less precarious world of the 1920s South Africa. And you have to meet a man named Raymond Dart. Dart was a brilliant, ambitious, and somewhat theatrical Australian anatomist who, in 1922, took up a professorship in Johannesburg, a location that was, at the time, considered a remote colonial outpost, far from the real scientific action in Europe and Asia. The scientific establishment of the day was convinced that humanity's cradle lay in Asia, and that the defining feature of our evolution, the thing that happened first, was the development of a large brain. Dart, isolated in his new post, was about to find something that would challenge all of that. The story of the discovery is the stuff of scientific legend. It's the summer of 1924, and Dart is at his home, dressed in his finest, preparing to serve as the best man at his friend's wedding, which is happening on his own property. As the festivities are about to begin, 2 large crates are delivered to his doorstep. They're from a limestone quarry near a town called Tong, and they are filled with fossil-bearing rocks. His friends and family try to pull him away, telling him the fossils can wait. But Dart is obsessed. He pries open one of the crates, and almost immediately, his eyes fix on a particular rock containing what looks like a fossilized brain cast, an endocast. He sees another rock that looks like it might fit with the first. Forgetting the wedding entirely, he brings the rocks to his study. For the next 3 months, he would meticulously chip away at the stone with his wife's knitting needles. What emerged would become one of the most famous and important fossils in history. The skull of a small child, with a full face and jaw, its milk teeth still in place. He called it the Tong child, and it was a scientific bombshell. While it had ape-like features, the evidence for its connection to humanity was, to Dart, undeniable. Its canine teeth were small, not the large fangs of a baboon. Most importantly, the position of the foramen magnum, the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord connects, was positioned directly underneath. This was the crucial scientific evidence. In apes, which walk on 4 legs, this hole is positioned towards the back of the skull. The Tong child's anatomy proved that it walked upright. Bipedalism came before big brains. It was a stunning reversal of the accepted theory, and the European paleontological community initially rejected his findings with outright scorn. But Dart didn't stop there. As more fossils were uncovered from similar cave sites, he began to construct a story not just about what these creatures were, but how they lived. The caves weren't just filled with the bones of your ancestor, Australopithecus africanus. They were jumbled together with the remains of countless other animals, particularly baboons. And Dart noticed a disturbing pattern. Many of the baboon skulls had depression fractures, often on the left side, as if they'd been struck by a right-handed assailant. He saw antelope leg bones that seemed perfectly shaped to be used as clubs. He saw jawbones with teeth that could serve as crude saws. From this, he spun a vivid and terrifying narrative. This wasn't a random collection of bones washed into a cave. This was a predator's den. Your ancestors, he argued, were not peaceful foragers. They were savage hunters who bashed in the heads of baboons and brought their carcasses back to their lairs. He gave this supposed toolkit a wonderfully elaborate and quirky name: the osteodontochoratic culture, a term cobbled together from Greek to mean a culture of bone-tooth-horn. This was the core of his killer ape hypothesis. The thirst for blood, he claimed, was what drove us from the trees. Our hands, freed by walking upright, were freed to kill. It was a powerful, disturbing, and deeply influential idea. It eventually seeped into the public consciousness, most famously immortalized in the opening scene of Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, where an ape man, to the sound of classical music, discovers a femur is a weapon and becomes a killer. That cinematic moment is a perfect distillation of Dart's theory, the idea that the dawn of man was the dawn of the murderer. That powerful, violent image of our ancestor as a killer held sway for nearly half a century. It was a simple, dramatic story. But science, its best, is a process of checking the receipts on dramatic stories. And in the 1960s, a new generation of scientists began to look at Dart's evidence not as a drama critic, but as a crime scene investigator. This required a whole new field of science, one with the wonderfully arcane name of taphonomy. Taphonomy is the study of everything that happens to an organism between the moment it dies and the moment it's dug up as a fossil millions of years later. It asks questions like, was this animal killed by a predator, or did it drown in a flood? Were its bones scattered by hyenas or tumbled in a river? Did it fall into a cave, or was it dragged there? Historians of science still argue about the best way to interpret these ancient clues, but taphonomy gave them a new set of rules for reading the evidence, turning paleoanthropology into a kind of prehistoric forensic science. The key figure in this story, the Sherlock Holmes to Dart's Edgar Allan Poe, was another South African paleontologist named C.K. Bob Brain. Brain was a deeply meticulous and patient scientist who felt that Dart's theory, while compelling, had made a critical error. Dart had looked at a pile of bones in a cave and assumed a single human-like cause for the whole mess. Brain realized that to understand the bone collections in ancient caves, you first had to understand how bones end up in caves in the modern world. So, for over a decade, he conducted a series of ingenious, if slightly morbid, real-world studies. He became a student of leopards, observing how they would haul their kills up into trees or into rocky lairs to keep them safe from other predators, and how they would crunch through skulls and rib cages, leaving very specific kinds of damage. He documented the immense power of hyena jaws, capable of splintering the largest femur to get at the marrow. He even spent an enormous amount of time studying porcupines, which, in a quirky twist of natural history, are obsessive bone collectors. They drag bones back to their dens to gnaw on them for the calcium they need to grow their quills, creating vast, jumbled collections that look, to the untrained eye, like a chaotic graveyard. Brain then took his modern observations and used them as a key to unlock the past. He went back to the same caves where Dart had found his evidence for the osteodontocoratic culture. He looked at the jumbled piles of bones, and instead of a killer ape's lair, he saw something entirely different. He saw the signature of a leopard's meal. He saw the gnaw marks of a porcupine. The so-called antelope leg clubs weren't weapons. They were simply the densest bones of the skeleton, the parts that were most likely to survive being chewed on and trampled. The baboon skulls with the neat depression fractures? Their damage was perfectly consistent with rocks falling from the cave roof over millennia, or from the immense pressure of the overlying sediments. There was no murderer. There was just geology, and the mundane, messy circle of life. But the final, devastating blow to the killer ape theory came when Brain re-examined the Taung child skull itself. He noticed something that had been overlooked for decades. Two small, perfectly placed puncture marks in the delicate bone of the child's eye sockets. He compared these marks to the skulls of modern monkeys and small animals that had been killed by birds of prey. The scientific evidence was undeniable. The puncture marks on the Taung child's skull were a perfect match for the beak and talons of an African crowned eagle, a massive raptor that even today is known for hunting primates. The iconic fossil, the supposed first killer, was in fact a victim. A bird got him. This single discovery flipped the entire narrative of human origins on its head. The title of Brain's groundbreaking 1981 book says it all. The Hunters or the Hunted. The evidence was now clear. For the first few million years of our story, you were not the hunter. You were the hunted. Your intelligence didn't evolve to create better clubs. It evolved to help you scan the skies for eagles, to remember where the hyena dens were, and to work together with your small, fragile family to simply stay alive for one more day. Our evolution wasn't forged in aggression. It was forged in fear. So, the killer ape is dead, slain by the patient detective work of Bob Brain and a well-aimed eagle. This leaves you with a profound problem. If you weren't a hunter, and your life was a constant exercise in avoiding predators, how did meat ever become a significant part of your diet? We know from the archaeological record that your ancestors were eating it, and many scientists believe that access to this calorie-dense, nutrient-rich food source was the catalyst for the growth of our brains. If you weren't killing for it, where were you getting it? The answer, it turns out, is that you were a thief. You got your meat the same way you get a great parking spot at a crowded mall. You waited for someone else to do all the hard work, and you swooped in the moment they left. This was the dawn of the scavenging hypothesis. The champion of this idea was a man named Louis Binford, a towering and often controversial figure in archaeology who exploded onto the scene in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Binford was a bit of a revolutionary, an intellectual brawler who felt that archaeology had become little more than a sophisticated form of stamp collecting. Scientists were just finding artifacts, describing them, and putting them in a museum drawer. Binford wanted to know why. He wanted to understand the behaviors and processes that created the patterns he was seeing in the ground. He wanted to turn archaeology into a true science. To do this, he pioneered a new approach, something he called ethno-archaeology, or living archaeology. The logic was simple but profound. If you want to understand how the bones and tools at an ancient hunter-gatherer site got there, you should probably go and watch modern hunter-gatherers in action. So, in the 1970s, Binford did just that. He traveled to the freezing wilderness of northern Alaska to live with and study a group of Nunamiut people, an Inupiat group who were among the last subsistence caribou hunters on Earth. For months, he sat in the cold, patiently observing, taking meticulous notes on everything they did. He watched how they tracked the caribou, how they made the kill, and most importantly for our story, how they butchered the animals. He documented which cuts of meat they took first, which bones they cracked open for marrow, and which parts of the skeleton they discarded. He created a definitive, real-world guide to how human activity gets written onto the bones of their prey. Armed with this powerful new Rosetta Stone for interpreting bones, Binford then turned his attention back to the earliest hominin sites in Africa, at places like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. He looked at the 1.8 million-year-old fossils, the bones of extinct elephants and giant buffalo that were covered in the cut marks from the very first stone tools. For decades, everyone had assumed these marks were evidence of hunting, but Binford, using his modern knowledge, looked closer. He put the fossils under a microscope, and what he saw changed the story of human origins for a second time. He saw the fine, thin, parallel scratches made by a hominin's sharp stone flake as they sliced meat from a bone. But he also saw other marks, deeper, wider, U-shaped grooves and puncture marks. These were the tooth marks of large carnivores. And then he saw the crucial relationship between them. In many cases, the thin stone tool cut marks were laid down on top of the deep carnivore tooth marks. The sequence was crystal clear, written in the language of the bones. The predator got there first. You came second. This was the undeniable scientific evidence. You weren't the mighty hunter dragging your kill back to the cave. You were showing up late to the party, after the lions or saber-toothed cats had already eaten their fill and moved on. You were a marginal scavenger. Your role in the grand theater of the African savannah was that of a clever opportunist. This might seem like a less glamorous role than the heroic hunter, but think about the intelligence it requires. It means you have to be a master naturalist. You have to know the habits of every predator in your territory. You have to be able to read the landscape for clues. The distant sight of vultures circling in the sky is a dinner bell, signaling a fresh kill on the plains below. It requires a sophisticated internal debate, a constant calculation of risk versus reward. How long do you wait before approaching the carcass? Are the lions that made the kill still nearby, sleeping in the grass? How much time do you have before the hyenas show up? This wasn't a life of brute force. It was a life of cunning, timing, and nerve. Lewis Binford's forensic analysis of the bones proved that you were a scavenger, but it didn't quite answer how. It still seems like a desperately risky way to make a living. Was there really enough food left on a carcass after a dozen hyenas or a pride of lions had finished their meal to justify the danger? Was a handful of sinew worth risking a violent encounter with the original owners of the kill? For the scavenging hypothesis to be truly plausible, someone had to do the math. Someone had to figure out what the actual return on investment was for a nervous hominin on the ancient savannah. That someone was paleoanthropologist Robert Blumenschein. Starting in the 1980s, Blumenschein took Binford's living archaeology approach to a whole new level of dedication and, frankly, nerve. If you wanted to know what scavenging opportunities were like 2 million years ago in the Serengeti, the best way to find out was to go to the modern Serengeti and see for yourself. So he and his research team conducted a series of daring field experiments. They would acquire the carcasses of animals like gazelles and wildebeest, place them in different environments, out on the open plains, in a wooded grove near a river, and then they'd climb into a heavily fortified Land Rover, get out their binoculars and stopwatches, and wait. They became professional observers of death. What they documented was a detailed timetable of consumption. They watched as lions made a kill and recorded precisely what they ate and in what order. The organs and the fleshy rump usually went first. They timed how long the lion stayed at the carcass before getting full and wandering off for a nap. They watched the hierarchy of other carnivores that followed. The spotted hyenas who would challenge the lions, the striped hyenas that would lurk, the jackals and vultures that would dart in for the smallest scraps. What Blumenschein discovered was that the life of a carcass was far more complex and offered more opportunities than anyone had previously imagined. His data provided the crucial scientific evidence. He found that a single large animal, like a wildebeest, was such a glut of resources that even a large pride of lions would often leave significant amounts of food behind. They were often picky, messy eaters, leaving entire limbs with plenty of meat still attached. More importantly, he confirmed that after gorging themselves, the primary predators would often leave the kill site for hours at a time, creating a relatively safe window for a clever scavenger to move in. This led to a scholarly debate that continues to this day. Was your ancestor a passive scavenger, timidly waiting until everyone else was long gone before inspecting the leftovers? Or were you a confrontational scavenger, perhaps working in a group to actively run in, shout, and wave your arms to scare a lone leopard off its prize? The answer is likely both, depending on the situation. This specific set of opportunities provides the perfect context for the very first stone toolkit. This is the world of your slightly more advanced cousin, Homo habilis, the handyman, who appears in the fossil record around 2.4 million years ago. For decades, his Oldowan tools, first discovered at Olduvai Gorge, were thought of as crude weapons. But when you see them in the context of scavenging, their true genius becomes clear. The toolkit is simple. You have a round, palm-sized core stone, often called a chopper, and you have the sharp, almost razor-like flakes of stone that you knock off that core by striking it with another rock. These are not tools for hunting. They are a portable butchering set. Imagine you've been watching a kill from a safe distance. The lions have moved off. You and your group nervously approach. The animal's hide is inches thick, impossible for your weak fingernails and blunt teeth to tear open. But with one of those small, sharp flakes, you have a surgical scalpel. You can slice through the skin and quickly cut away the scraps of meat the predators left behind. But the real prize, the hidden treasure chest, is still locked away. Inside the thickest leg bones is the bone marrow, an incredibly dense source of the fats and proteins essential for building a bigger brain. And inside the skull is the brain itself, another fatty superfood. No other animal, not even the bone-crushing hyenas, could easily get into the thickest femurs or crack open a skull. But you could. With your heavy chopper, you had a hammer. You could systematically strike the bone until it cracked, exposing the priceless, calorie-rich marrow inside. This was your secret weapon. This was your first real superpower. Using your mind to see a rock not as a rock, but as a key. A tool to unlock a vast, untouched larder that was all yours. Your new toolkit, the simple stone flake and chopper, was a game changer. It allowed you and your kin, the small but clever Homo habilis, to carve out a unique niche on the dangerous African plains. You became a specialized scavenger, a master of the secondary kill site. This new, reliable source of high-fat, high-protein food had a profound effect. Over hundreds of thousands of years, it fueled the slow, but steady expansion of your brain. But the world itself was not standing still. The entire planet was entering a long, slow, cooling and drying period. In Africa, this meant the ancient forests and woodlands began to retreat, and in their place, a new landscape spread out to the horizon, the open savanna, a vast sea of grass, with few trees to climb for safety and resources that were now much more widely dispersed. This new world demanded a new kind of hominin. The short-legged, long-armed body plan of your ancestors, still partly adapted for a life in the trees, was becoming obsolete. Survival in this open, exposed environment required the ability to travel long distances efficiently, to move between scattered patches of food and water under a relentless sun. And right on cue, around 2 million years ago, a new player walks onto the stage. And this one looks remarkably like you. This is Homo erectus. Fossils like the famous Nariokotomi boy, an astonishingly complete skeleton of an adolescent boy who lived 1.5 million years ago, show us this transformation in stunning detail. You are no longer 4 feet tall and built like a chimpanzee. You are tall, perhaps over 5.5 feet, with long, slender legs and shorter arms. Your hips are narrower, your whole body re-engineered for a striding 2-legged gait. For the first time in our lineage, an ancestor appears with body proportions that are fundamentally, unmistakably modern. This new body was clearly built for something. It was built for motion. And with this new body comes a powerful, elegant, and long-debated theory for how you finally made the leap from a lowly scavenger to a true hunter. It's called the persistence hunting hypothesis. The idea is as simple as it is brilliant. You didn't need to be faster than your prey. You didn't need to be stronger. You just needed to be more patient. You could hunt, the theory goes, by quite literally running an animal to death. Picture the scene. It's midday on the plains, the hottest part of the day, a time when most predators are lying in the shade, conserving energy. You and your small hunting party spot a herd of kudu, large antelope with magnificent spiral horns. You don't bother with stealth. You simply walk towards them. The herd, seeing you, takes off in a flash of hooves and dust. They are sprinters, capable of incredible bursts of speed. They can leave you in their dust in a matter of seconds. And they do. They sprint for a few hundred yards, and then, confident they've escaped, they slow down and look back. And they see you. You haven't stopped. You're just jogging. A slow, steady, loping run, eating up the ground at a pace that seems almost comically relaxed. The kudu are unnerved. They sprint again. Again, they easily outpace you. They stop. They look back. And there you are, still coming, still jogging at that same infuriatingly steady pace. For the kudu, this is a nightmare. Its entire survival strategy is based on short bursts of explosive speed to escape a predator, followed by a period of rest to recover. But you deny it that rest. Every time it tries to stop, you appear on the horizon, a relentless, upright figure, jogging closer. The animal is a quadruped. To cool down, it has to pant. But it can't pant effectively while it's galloping. With every sprint, it builds up an internal heat debt that it cannot repay. Its body temperature climbs higher and higher, approaching its critical thermal maximum. You, on the other hand, are just getting warmed up. After miles of this relentless pursuit under the blazing sun, the magnificent kudu begins to stumble. Its muscles are seizing. It's reached its physiological limit. It is in the grips of hypothermia, heat stroke. Finally, it simply stops, unable to move another step, its sides heaving. You, barely breathing hard, jog up to the exhausted creature. The hunt is over. You have won, not with claws or fangs, but with the one thing you have in greater supply than any other creature on the savannah: persistence. This cinematic vision of the persistence hunt is more than just a good story. It's backed up by a remarkable collection of anatomical evidence written directly into your new body. When scientists like Daniel Lieberman and Dennis Bramble began to systematically compare the anatomy of the Homo erectus to earlier hominins and modern apes, they found a whole suite of features that seemed to have one primary purpose: to turn you into a phenomenal long-distance running machine. To see how, we just need to take a quick tour of your new and improved hardware, starting from the top down. First, there's the problem of your head. When you run, your body jostles up and down, and without some way to counteract that motion, your head would bob around like a dashboard hula dancer. This would make your vision unstable, making it impossible to keep your eyes locked on a distant target. Your ancestors, like modern chimpanzees, lacked the anatomy to solve this. But you have a new piece of equipment: the nuchal ligament. It's a strong elastic band of tissue that runs from the base of your skull down your neck, connecting to your upper spine. You don't have to think about it. It works passively, like a biological shock absorber, keeping your head remarkably steady as you lope across the plains. This simple but critical adaptation is one of the first clear signs that your body was being engineered for running. Next, let's move down to your legs and feet, which have been transformed into a pair of high-efficiency biological springs. The most obvious upgrade is your Achilles tendon, the long, thick cord connecting your calf muscle to your heel bone. In apes, it's short and insignificant. In you, it's enormous and packed with elastic fibers. You also have a well-developed arch in your foot. Together, these two structures work like the spring on a pogo stick. When your foot hits the ground, the tendon and the arch stretch, storing a huge amount of elastic energy. As you push off for the next stride, they recoil, releasing that stored energy and flinging you forward. This mechanism is the core scientific evidence for our running efficiency. It's estimated to cut the metabolic cost of running by as much as 50%. You are, in essence, getting half of your energy for each stride for free, recycled from the previous one. Then there's the powerhouse. You have a massive muscle that earlier hominins lacked. The gluteus maximus. Yes, your butt. It's proportionally the largest and most powerful muscle in your entire body. And yet, in a quirky twist, it's almost completely dormant when you're just walking around. It's a specialized running muscle. Its main job isn't to push you forward, but to stop you from falling over. When you run, each time your foot strikes the ground, your entire upper body wants to pitch forward. Your glutes fire at that exact moment, acting as a powerful brake on your torso, keeping you upright and stable. But all of these adaptations, the head stabilizer, the leg springs, the powerful core, would be useless without your single greatest weapon in a long-distance race: your cooling system. This is your master superpower. Most other mammals on the savannah, including your prey, cool themselves down by panting. But panting has a critical flaw. It's mechanically linked to breathing, and you can't pant effectively when you're galloping at full speed. So, as they run, their bodies generate a tremendous amount of heat that they simply can't get rid of. You, on the other hand, have evolved a revolutionary new strategy. You've lost your thick coat of body hair, and your skin is now covered in millions of eccrine sweat glands. As you run, you pump out a salty fluid onto the surface of your skin. The heat from your body evaporates that fluid, carrying the excess warmth away with it. You have become a walking, talking, full-body radiator. While the kudu is slowly cooking from the inside out, you are efficiently venting all your excess heat into the air, allowing you to keep going and going and going. It's this entire package of interconnected features that makes the persistence hunting hypothesis so compelling. Your body isn't just a machine that can run, it's a machine that appears to be exquisitely and specifically built for it. With such a compelling suite of biological evidence, the persistence hunting hypothesis wasn't just a dry scientific theory for long. It exploded out of the pages of academic journals and into the popular imagination, capturing the world's attention because it told us such a powerful and flattering story about ourselves. It was a narrative that felt right. It replaced the ugly, brutish image of the killer ape and the pathetic, skulking image of the marginal scavenger with something heroic. It painted a picture of your ancestor as a creature of immense grit and determination, an underdog who won not with overwhelming force, but with the quiet, stubborn refusal to give up. It was a Rocky Balboa origin story for the entire human race. The idea was rocket-fueled into the mainstream in 2009 by a single wildly popular book, Christopher McDougall's Born to Run. The book masterfully wove together the evolutionary science of Lieberman and Bramble with the modern running boom and the incredible story of the Tarahumara people, a reclusive indigenous group living deep in the copper canyons of Mexico. The Tarahumara, or Raramuri as they call themselves, are renowned for their culture of long-distance running. They run for communication, for ceremony, and for sport, covering astonishing distances, sometimes well over 100 miles at a time, through treacherous mountain terrain. And they often do it wearing little more than a loincloth and a pair of simple homemade sandals called huaraches, which, in a quirky testament to their resourcefulness, are often sold with pieces of old car tires. For millions of readers, the Tarahumara became living proof of our evolutionary inheritance. They were a window into the past, a people who had seemingly never forgotten our species' latent superpower. McDougall's book became a cultural touchstone, launching the minimalist running and barefoot running movements, and giving millions of amateur joggers a profound new reason for their passion. You weren't just running a 10K on a Saturday morning to stay in shape. You were reenacting the sacred ancient hunt. You were tapping into the deepest, most fundamental part of your being. And the Tarahumara weren't the only modern evidence. Anthropologists pointed to another group, the San people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. For decades, there had been anecdotal reports of them hunting in this manner. But many scholars were skeptical about how common the practice really was. That skepticism largely vanished thanks to the power of television. In his iconic 2002 documentary series, The Life of Mammals, the legendary naturalist David Attenborough included a sequence that has since become famous. A BBC film crew followed a San hunter in the blazing heat of the Kalahari as he set off in pursuit of a kudu. The footage is astonishing. It shows the entire process exactly as the hypothesis predicted. The initial chase, the relentless tracking, the animal slowly succumbing to heat exhaustion, and the final quiet moments of the hunt. Watching it is like looking through a time machine. Here was living, breathing scientific evidence of your ancestors' supposed strategy, playing out on the same landscape where it first evolved. Between the elegant biological arguments, the inspiring stories of the Tarahumara, and the undeniable film footage of the San, the case for persistence hunting seemed almost airtight. It's an incredibly romantic and complete narrative. It explains your oddly shaped body, it provides an epic origin story that makes you the hero, and it connects that ancient past directly to a modern, global passion. For a time, it felt like we had finally found it. We had found the single unifying theory that explained our transition from prey to predator. Our secret superpower wasn't a killer instinct or a scavenger's cunning. It was the heart and lungs and legs of the greatest endurance athlete the world has ever known. And yet, science is a beautifully unsentimental process. It loves to build a magnificent, elegant theory, and then it loves to take a hammer to it to see if it holds up. And as the persistence hunting hypothesis grew in popularity, other scientists began to poke at its foundations, asking harder and harder questions. The anatomy was compelling, the modern examples were inspiring, but did the whole scenario actually work when you subjected it to the unforgiving laws of physiology? Does this beautiful story, in other words, hold water? It turns out that this question is not a metaphor. The single biggest problem, the critical flaw that threatens to bring the entire beautiful narrative crashing down, is literally water. The scientist who most clearly laid out this challenge was Kara Wool-Scheffler, a kinesiologist who looked at the problem from the perspective of a sports physiologist. She wasn't as concerned with the evolution of the Achilles tendon. She was concerned with the body's fuel and hydration levels. She started with a simple, brutal calculation. What is the actual measurable fluid cost of running for hours in the heat? Your secret weapon, after all, is sweating. But that weapon comes at a staggering price. The scientific data on this is clear. A modern endurance athlete, exercising in hot, dry conditions similar to the African savanna, can easily sweat out over 1.5 liters of fluid every single hour. Let's do the math on a hypothetical persistence hunt. Say you're a 150-pound Homo erectus. A conservative hunt might take 3 hours. At a sweat rate of 1.5 liters per hour, you would lose 4.5 liters of water. That's more than a gallon. Physiologically, this is catastrophic. Losing just 2% of your body weight in water leads to a significant drop in performance and a powerful thirst. At a 5% loss, you experience dizziness, fatigue, and a dangerously elevated heart rate. By the time you lose 7% of your body weight in water, which for our 150-pound hunter is about 4.7 liters, you are heading into the red zone of circulatory collapse and life-threatening heat stroke. In a longer hunt, say 5 hours, your fluid loss could approach 8 liters. That's not a feat of endurance, it's a death sentence. The obvious solution, of course, is to simply drink water as you go. Any modern marathon runner knows this. They have aid stations every couple of miles, offering water and electrolyte drinks. Their entire performance is dependent on constant rehydration. So what were the aid stations like for Homo erectus 1.5 million years ago? This is the core of the problem, the great technological gap in the story. You had no water bottles. You had no canteens. Pottery, the quintessential water-carrying technology, wouldn't be invented for another 1.8 million years, an almost unimaginable span of time. Could you have used other materials? Perhaps. The San people of the Kalahari, who we saw in that documentary footage, famously use ostrich eggshells as canteens. But making one of those requires finding an egg, carefully drilling a hole, and plugging it with grass. A sophisticated piece of technology for which we have no evidence from that ancient time. Could you have used an animal's stomach or bladder? Again, possibly. But turning a soft, leaky organ into a durable, watertight container is a complex process. The simple, stark reality is that your ancestor almost certainly set out on any given day with no way to carry a significant amount of water. You could maybe drink your fill at a river in the morning, but that was it. This single glaring issue puts the entire persistence hunting hypothesis in jeopardy, at least as the primary, day-to-day hunting strategy. In the ongoing scientific debate, this is the major point of contention. The image of the heroic endurance hunter is a powerful one, but the physiology is unforgiving. Without water-carrying technology, a multi-hour chase under the midday sun ceases to be a viable hunting strategy. It becomes a suicide mission. The kudu might eventually collapse from hypothermia, but there's a very good chance that you would be right there behind it, collapsing from catastrophic dehydration. This brings you to a fascinating scientific crossroads. The evidence written in your bones seems to be screaming that you were born to run. Your body is packed with elegant, high-performance running adaptations, from the ligaments in your neck to the tendons in your feet. Yet the brutal, unforgiving math of dehydration suggests that the most popular reason for all this hardware, the persistence hunt, was likely a rare, high-risk strategy at best, not a daily routine. So, you're left with a profound question, a major point of debate among paleontologists today. If you didn't evolve this incredible endurance engine to run down prey, then why did you evolve it at all? What was this superpower actually for? The answer is likely not a single dramatic story, but a collection of more practical, everyday advantages. The most compelling alternative theory takes you right back to your previous life as a scavenger, but with a crucial upgrade. Let's call it power scavenging, or fast scavenging. Remember, the key challenge of a scavenger's life is competition. When a saber-toothed cat takes down a giant buffalo, that event sends a signal across the landscape. Vultures, with their incredible eyesight, are the first to notice. They begin to circle high in the sky, a living feathered dinner bell that can be seen for miles around. You aren't the only one who can read that signal. Every hyena, jackal, and rival group of hominins for miles around sees the same thing. A race begins. In this race, your new, long-legged, spring-loaded body gives you an immense advantage. While your shorter, less efficient cousins had to slowly trudge their way there, you could break into a steady, ground-eating trot. You could cover the miles quickly, arriving at the kill site before the main crowd of competitors. The race was no longer against the prey animal. The race was against the other scavengers. Getting there first meant you had your pick of the leftovers. It meant you could use your stone tools to slice off the best cuts of meat and crack open the most marrow-rich bones before the much more dangerous hyenas arrived in force. Your endurance wasn't for wearing an animal down. It was for closing the gap on an opportunity before it vanished. Another powerful explanation lies in the very nature of the new world you inhabited. The expanding savanna was a landscape of scarcity and distance. The resources you needed to survive, permanent waterholes, stands of fruit-bearing trees, rocky outcrops with the best stone for making tools, were not conveniently located next to each other. They were scattered, patchy, and often miles apart. Your body, with its incredible capacity for efficient long-distance travel, was perfectly adapted for this nomadic life. You could spend the morning at a river, then travel 10 miles in the heat of the day to a grove of trees you remembered from the previous season, and then travel another 5 miles to a cave for the night. This ability to cover ground was the key that unlocked the entire savanna. And it was this same ability that, around 1.8 million years ago, allowed your species, Homo erectus, to become the first hominin to ever walk out of Africa, spreading across Asia and into Europe. You were the first great globetrotter, and your legs were the engine of that expansion. So where does that leave your superpower of endurance? The mistake, perhaps, was in thinking it had to have a single glorious purpose. It was not a specialized weapon. It was a multi-tool. It was a foundational ability that made your entire way of life possible. It allowed you to race to a carcass, to trek between water sources, to explore new territories. And yes, maybe on a rare, cool, overcast day when conditions were perfect, to even run a weak or isolated animal to exhaustion. The lesson from your newly evolved body is that your physical prowess was not the final answer. It was simply the platform upon which the next, and far more significant, revolution would be built. You had mastered the physical world of the savannah. Now you had to master the social world you were creating. So you now have this magnificent new body, a machine built for covering vast distances. But so far, our entire search for your secret superpower has been a story about chasing meat across the landscape. We've followed the drama of the killer ape, the cunning of the scavenger, and the endurance of the plains runner. But in doing so, we've kept the camera tightly focused on one half of the population and on a single high-risk activity. For much of the 20th century, the study of human origins was dominated by this narrative, a framework solidified in a famous 1968 academic symposium unapologetically titled Man the Hunter. It created a powerful feedback loop where scientists, mostly male, went looking for evidence of male activities, and in doing so, painted a picture of prehistory that looked a lot like a boy's adventure story. But what if we pan the camera away? What if we turn our attention from the dramatic but often unsuccessful chase scene and focus instead on what everyone else was doing back at the home base? When you do that, a completely different and arguably more important part of the story comes into view. In the 1970s and 80s, a new generation of scholars, many of them women, began to challenge the old narrative. This led to a long and sometimes heated scholarly debate that forced the entire field to re-examine its assumptions. They proposed a vital corrective, a new model for our origins known as the woman-the-gatherer hypothesis. This idea starts with a simple, practical question. A big game hunt is a spectacular success when it works. A single large kill can feed a group for days. But the reality is that most hunts fail. What did you and your family eat on the 7, 8, or 9 days out of 10 when the hunters came back empty-handed? The answer is that your survival wasn't built on the rare, dramatic boom of a successful hunt, but on the steady, reliable, day-in, day-out foundation of gathered foods. This was the true daily bread of your ancestors. This wasn't just a few berries to tide you over. This was a complex and varied portfolio of resources. It was energy-rich nuts and seeds that had to be cracked open. It was seasonal fruits and edible leaves. It was the eggs stolen from birds' nests. It was slow-moving, easy-to-catch protein like lizards, tortoises, and shellfish if you were near a coast. And it was a food source that modern Western cultures often forget: insects. Termites, fat-rich and protein-packed, could be harvested in huge numbers from their mounds. This is the part of the paleo diet that doesn't make it into the fancy cookbooks. The scientific evidence for the importance of this lifestyle is overwhelming. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Kungsan of the Kalahari, have consistently shown that anywhere from 60 to 80% of the group's total caloric intake comes from these gathered foods, primarily collected by women. The meat from the hunt is a celebrated and nutritionally important luxury, but the plant foods are the economic bedrock that keeps the society from going bust. Crucially, this was not a simple or unskilled task. gathering required its own profound and sophisticated kind of intelligence. To be a successful gatherer, you needed to hold a massive, encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world in your head. It was a form of applied botany. You had to know which of the hundreds of plant species in your territory was edible, which was medicinal, and which was deadly poison. You needed a detailed mental map of your entire territory, stretching for miles in every direction, remembering the location of that one stand of nut trees, or that patch of berry bushes that was always the last to ripen. This mental map wasn't static, it was four-dimensional. You had to understand seasonality, to know that the tubers would be best after the rains, or that the berries would be ripe in the dry season. This was a quiet, patient, deeply intellectual superpower, and it was the reliable engine that truly fueled your society day after day for 1,000,000 years. Among that wide portfolio of gathered foods, one category stands out as the true unsung hero of human survival. It wasn't the sweet, seasonal berries or the protein-rich nuts, as valuable as they were. It was the humble, gritty, and often overlooked food source that you had to work for, the stuff that grew underground. Scientists have a typically unglamorous name for it: underground storage organs, or USOS. But you can think of it as your secret underground supermarket. These were the tubers, roots, corms, and bulbs of the savanna's hardy plants. They were nature's buried potatoes, and they were the single most important resource that allowed your species to thrive. What made these buried treasures so special was their reliability. Fruits ripen and rot. Herds of animals migrate. But tubers are a plant's savings account. They are dense packages of starch and water that plants use to survive the long dry season or to regenerate after a fire. Because they were designed for long-term storage by the plants themselves, they were available to you year-round. They were the dependable, predictable fallback food that you could always rely on, even when every other source of nutrition had vanished from the landscape. Finding them wasn't always easy, but you knew they were always there, waiting beneath the hard, sun-baked earth. The scientific evidence for the importance of this food source is written in the very chemistry of your ancestors' teeth. By analyzing the carbon isotopes in fossilized tooth enamel, scientists can reconstruct the diet of an ancient hominin. When they looked at the teeth of a cousin species of yours that lived at the same time, Paranthropus boisei, famously nicknamed Nutcracker Man for his gigantic molar teeth, they found a chemical signature overwhelmingly dominated by so-called C4 plants. This category includes the grasses and sedges that form the bulk of the savanna's vegetation, many of which produce edible tubers. Nutcracker Man's enormous teeth were likely an adaptation for grinding down these tough, fibrous, and abrasive underground foods. It's a clear sign that hominins in this environment were exploiting this vast subterranean larder. But while Nutcracker Man had the dental hardware to process these foods, you had a crucial piece of technology to acquire them. You had the digging stick. It's hard to overstate the importance of this simple tool. Because it was made of wood, examples from millions of years ago have long since rotted away, leading to a vigorous scholarly debate about exactly when it was invented. But its impact is undeniable. It was likely nothing more than a long, straight branch, with one end sharpened to a point and perhaps hardened in the embers of a fire. Yet it was a revolutionary invention. It acted as a lever, multiplying the force you could exert and allowing you to break up ground that was impossible to dig with your bare hands. You can see its value when you compare you to other animals. Modern baboons also eat tubers, but they are limited by their own anatomy. As a quirky but insightful study once noted, Their short thumbs and quadrupedal stance make them inefficient diggers. They have to scrape away at the dirt with their fingers. You, however, with your upright posture, could put your entire body weight onto the digging stick. Your hands, with their long, opposable thumbs, were perfectly adapted to grip it and direct it with precision. The digging stick was a simple but profound piece of technology that unlocked an enormous food resource that was largely inaccessible to your competitors. This created the fundamental economic reality of your society. You essentially had two parallel economies running at all times. The first was the hunting economy. It was flashy, it was dangerous, and it brought in the highly prized resource of meat and fat. It conferred immense social status. But it was also a high-risk boom and bust system with a failure rate of probably over 90%. The second, quieter economy was the gathering economy, based largely on these underground foods. It was predictable, it was reliable, and it was the source of the vast majority of your group's day-to-day calories. You can think of hunting as a volatile stock market investment, while gathering was the stable government bond that paid out a modest but guaranteed return every single day. It was this steady, reliable income of carbohydrates from the underground supermarket that formed the safety net for your entire society. It was the caloric foundation that gave the hunters the luxury of failing. This stable foundation of gathered food, this underground supermarket, doesn't just change your diet. It changes everything about your society. It allows for a level of social complexity and cooperation that was impossible before. And it may be the answer to one of the most profound and persistent puzzles in human biology: the mystery of menopause. From a cold, purely Darwinian perspective, a long life after you've stopped being able to reproduce makes very little sense. Natural selection, after all, is fundamentally about passing on your genes. An animal that lives for 30 or 40 years beyond its childbearing age is, in a way, taking up resources without contributing to the gene pool of the next generation. This is why a long post-reproductive lifespan is a genuine historical fact of its own, being incredibly rare in the animal kingdom. Aside from humans, it's only been observed in a handful of other species, most of them toothed whales like orcas and short-finned pilot whales. So why you? Why would evolution grant you decades of extra life after your own reproductive story was over? The answer, according to a fascinating and still debated theory known as the grandmother hypothesis, is that your story wasn't over. You were just getting started on the most important work of your life. The chief architect of this idea is the anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, who, beginning in the 1980s, spent years living with and studying the Hadza, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer groups in Tanzania. Like Lewis Binford before her, Hawkes believed that the key to understanding the past was to meticulously observe the present. She didn't just interview the Hadza women, she went out foraging with them, day after day, with a stopwatch and a hanging scale, weighing the tubers and berries they brought back to camp. She tracked every calorie, creating a detailed ledger of who was producing food and who was consuming it. Through this patient, quantitative work, she made a remarkable discovery. The young mothers, those in their reproductive prime, were not the most productive members of the group. They were constrained. A human infant is uniquely helpless and dependent, and for the first few years of its life, it needs to be carried everywhere. A mother with a baby on her hip and a toddler to keep an eye on simply can't travel as far, dig as long, or take as many risks as an unencumbered woman. But Hawkes noticed another group of women who had no such constraints: the older, post-menopausal women, the grandmothers. This was the quirky but crucial observation at the heart of her work. The most dedicated, knowledgeable, and consistently productive foragers in the entire community were the grandmothers. From this, she built the grandmother hypothesis. The theory proposes that natural selection favored a longer lifespan for women precisely because their contributions as grandmothers were so vital. By ceasing to have children of their own, they were freed up to invest their time, energy, and a lifetime of accumulated knowledge into their existing offspring, specifically their daughters' children. A grandmother doesn't just forage for herself. She provides a critical stream of surplus calories that flows directly to her grandchildren. This is the core scientific evidence that underpins the theory. Hawkes's data showed a direct, measurable link between a child's health and the presence of an active, foraging grandmother. Children whose grandmothers helped provision them were better nourished, they weaned earlier, and they had a significantly higher chance of surviving to adulthood. The ripple effects of this are enormous. A young mother, subsidized by her own mother's efforts, is relieved of some of the caloric burden of her existing children. This allows her to have her next baby sooner, shortening the time between births. For an individual family, this is a huge advantage. But scaled up over an entire population and across thousands of generations, it's a world-changing demographic shift. It would have allowed human populations to grow at a much faster rate than other hominin species that lacked this unique three-generation system of cooperation. Our secret superpower, then, might not be a physical tool or an individual skill. It might be this social revolution, the evolution of the helpful, productive, and knowledgeable grandmother, a quiet force with the power to reshape the destiny of our entire species. When you weave these threads together, the steady, reliable calories from the underground supermarket and the multi-generational support system of the grandmother hypothesis, the fabric of your daily life begins to look entirely new. This combination of economic stability and social support makes a revolutionary new way of living possible, a behavior that would set your lineage on a completely different path from every other primate. You invent the concept of a home. Not a permanent, settled home like a house, but a home base. A specific, favored spot on the landscape that serves as the social and economic anchor of your group. For most animals, life is a continuous wander. You eat where you find food, you sleep where you happen to be when night falls. But you, with your new social safety net, can operate differently. The gatherers can fan out in one direction, confident in what they'll find. The hunters or scavengers can range for miles in another, pursuing a high-risk opportunity. But at the end of the day, everyone comes back to the same place. This is the model that archaeologists, following the pioneering work of Glyn Isaac, call central place foraging. And when they excavate ancient sites in places like Olduvai Gorge, this is exactly what they find. They don't find tools and bones randomly scattered across the landscape. They find them in dense, concentrated patches, the scientific evidence of a place that was used over and over again. While there is still a lively scholarly debate about whether these were true, family-style campsites or simply convenient spots for butchering a carcass, the evidence for some kind of central hub is undeniable. This home base enables what is perhaps the most critical and uniquely human behavior of all: systematic, large-scale food sharing. This may sound simple, but it is a radical departure from the primate norm. Our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, provide a perfect contrast. A male chimp who manages to catch a small monkey is immediately mobbed by the rest of his group. They will beg, whine, and harass him relentlessly. And he might, as a quirky but well-documented fact, share a few scraps, often begrudgingly, to get them off his back. But it's not a calm, organized distribution of resources. It's a tense, politically charged negotiation. Your system is different. It is a true collective economy. At the end of the day, the food brought back to the home base is pooled. The tubers and roots gathered by the women, perhaps with help from the grandmothers, form the bulk of the meal. If the hunters have been lucky and brought back a leg from an antelope, that is added to the collective pot. The food is then shared throughout the group, ensuring that everyone, from the most productive grandmother to the most helpless infant, from the successful hunter to the one who came back empty-handed, gets enough to eat. This behavior is an invisible technology, a piece of social software that is far more powerful than any stone chopper. It requires a massive cognitive leap. It requires trust, a deeply held belief that the food you share today will be reciprocated by others tomorrow. It requires a sense of the future and the ability to delay immediate gratification for a long-term social gain. It requires memory, the capacity to keep a mental ledger of who is contributing and who is not. This is the birth of a true social contract. You can picture the scene at the end of the day. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the savannah. The group gathers at this chosen spot, perhaps in the shelter of a rocky outcrop. This place becomes the first living room. It's where the day's experiences are shared, where information is exchanged. A new patch of berry bushes was discovered. Lion tracks were seen by the river. It's where social bonds are groomed and strengthened, where alliances are formed, and where children learn by watching their elders. This home base and the food sharing it enables is a superpower in its own right. It turns a collection of vulnerable individuals into a single, cohesive, and incredibly resilient superorganism. This new, highly cooperative society, anchored by a home base and built on the foundation of shared food, is already a superpower. But now, you are about to add an element that will transform it entirely, supercharging every aspect of your existence. You are about to capture fire. The true origin of this technology is one of the greatest mysteries of our past, shrouded in the smoke of millennia. The question of when your ancestors moved from the opportunistic use of a natural wildfire to the true control and, eventually, the ability to make fire at will is a topic of intense scholarly debate. The earliest, most widely accepted evidence for the controlled use of fire comes from a site in modern-day Israel called Gesher Benot Yaakov, dating back nearly 800,000 years. But whenever it began, the moment your ancestor first learned to tame a flickering flame was the moment your destiny changed forever. The most immediate benefits were warmth and safety. Fire pushed back the cold of the night, allowing you to survive in more temperate climates. But more importantly, it was a shield against the dark. The circle of firelight became a sanctuary, a zone of safety that the great nocturnal predators, the lions, the hyenas, the saber-tooths, would not dare to cross. For the first time, the night was not something to be feared and hidden from. It was a part of the day that you could own. This simple act of creating a bubble of light and warmth in a world of darkness fundamentally rewired your psychology. The campfire also became the glowing heart of your new social world. It amplified all the advantages of the home base. It extended the usable hours of the day, giving you more time for making tools, for mending skins, and for social interaction. It's not hard to imagine that the campfire, with its mesmerizing, flickering light, was also the birthplace of a new kind of communication. As a quirky but compelling theory suggests, this is where the first true stories may have been told, where the day's events were recounted, and where culture began to be woven in the dark. But the most profound transformation that fire brought about was inside your own body. This is the core of what primatologist Richard Wrangham calls the cooking hypothesis. His argument is that the invention of cooking was the single most important step in our evolution, because it is, in essence, a form of external digestion. When you cook your food, you are using the heat of the fire to do much of the work that your stomach and intestines would otherwise have to do. Think about what cooking does. It breaks down the tough cellulose in plant cell walls, releasing the nutrients locked inside. It gelatinizes the dense starches in those tubers from your underground supermarket, turning them from indigestible grit into a high-energy paste. It neutralizes many of the natural toxins and anti-nutrients that wild plants produce to defend themselves. For meat, it melts the tough collagen and connective tissues into a soft, easily digestible gelatin. It also kills a host of dangerous bacteria and parasites. Cooking doesn't just make food safer and tastier, it makes it vastly more energy efficient. Your body gets far more calories and nutrients out of a cooked piece of meat or a roasted tuber than it does from a raw one, and it expends far less energy in the process of digestion. This dietary revolution had a direct and dramatic impact on your anatomy. This is where the scientific evidence of the expensive tissue hypothesis comes into play. In any animal's body, there is a finite energy budget. The gut, with its miles of intestines, is an incredibly expensive organ to build and maintain. But on a diet of soft, energy-dense, cooked food, you no longer need a massive, primate-style digestive tract designed for breaking down tough, raw vegetation. Over thousands of generations of eating cooked food, your gut could shrink, becoming smaller and far less metabolically costly. This freed up a huge amount of metabolic energy in your daily budget. And where did all that surplus energy go? It was rerouted to build and fuel the only organ in the body even more expensive to run than the gut: your brain. Fire, in essence, was your external stomach, and by outsourcing the work of digestion to the campfire, you unlocked the caloric energy needed to grow the powerful, complex, and distinctively human brain. Let's take a moment to pause and take stock of the toolkit you've assembled so far. You have a body that has been re-engineered for incredible endurance, a machine for crossing the vast, open savanna. You have a stable, reliable food economy built on the encyclopedic knowledge of the gatherers and their underground supermarket. You have a revolutionary social structure, the home base, supported by the intergenerational cooperation of the grandmother hypothesis. And you have the transformative power of fire, a tool that provides safety, warmth, a social center, and most critically, a supercharged high-energy diet that is fueling the rapid expansion of the brain sitting in your skull. It feels like all the pieces are finally on the board. You've evolved from a hunted prey animal into a highly successful cooperative forager. But science is never quite that tidy. Just when a story seems to settle, a new piece of evidence always emerges, a nagging little detail that doesn't quite fit. And in the 1990s and 2000s, archaeologists began to go back to the very same fossil sites that had been studied for decades. But they were armed with a new and much more powerful set of analytical tools. It was like reopening a cold case, and what they found would challenge the neat narrative we've just built. The detectives in this case were zoo archaeologists like Henry Bunn and Travis Pickering. Their specialty is teasing out the subtle stories told by the animal bones left behind at ancient sites. They weren't just looking for cut marks to prove that you were butchering animals. They wanted to know which animals you were butchering. Not just what species, but how old they were when they died. They began to meticulously analyze the fossil assemblages to build what is known as a mortality profile, a demographic snapshot of the victims. It's a bit like a modern wildlife manager studying a population of deer, determining the age of death for each animal to understand what is preying on the herd. To understand the power of this technique, you have to know what different profiles look like. If you are a scavenger, for instance, you are an opportunist. You take what death provides. This means you're mostly finding the animals that die of disease, starvation, or are the easiest for other predators to kill. This population is always heavily skewed towards the very young, who are small and vulnerable, and the very old, who are sick and weak. If you plotted this on a graph, it would create what scientists call a U-shaped curve, with lots of deaths at the beginning and end of the lifespan, and very few in the middle. Now, what about persistence hunting? The whole strategy is based on isolating and running down the least formidable member of a herd. Once again, this is unlikely to be the alpha male in his prime. You would logically target a younger animal that can't keep up with the adults, or an older one that has lost a step. So, a persistence hunting mortality profile should also be heavily biased away from prime-aged adults. But when Bunn and Pickering painstakingly analyzed the age profiles of the animal bones from key hominin sites, the scientific evidence they uncovered told a completely different story. The bones of the large animals you were eating, the giant buffalo, the wildebeest, the eland, were not from the young and the old. Overwhelmingly, they belonged to healthy, prime-of-life adults. The mortality profile didn't look like a U-shape at all. It looked like a bell curve, pushed right into the middle of the lifespan. This single, stubborn fact throws a wrench into everything. This is not the signature of a scavenger. It's not the signature of a hunter who relies on exhausting the weak. This, as a quirky but crucial point of comparison, is the signature of the most dangerous and effective predators on the entire continent. This is what the kill profile of a pride of lions looks like. Lions, with their power, speed, and coordinated teamwork, are confident enough to take on the biggest, strongest, and most dangerous bull in the herd. The evidence in the bones suggests that you, a small, fangless, clawless primate, were somehow doing the same thing. The question is, how? Your physical endurance isn't enough to explain this. Your social cooperation is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the full picture. This evidence demands a new explanation, a theory based not on your legs or your stomach, but on the new, powerful, and growing superpower housed inside your skull. So you find yourself with a first-rate archaeological mystery on your hands. The bones at your feet clearly show that you are successfully and repeatedly killing the biggest and toughest animals on the savannah. But your own body, your lack of speed, your dull teeth, your blunt fingernails, insists that this should be impossible. How do you square this circle? The answer, the leading theory that resolves this contradiction, is that you had learned to use a weapon far more powerful than any muscle or fang. You were using your mind. You had become a strategist. This is the ambush hunting hypothesis. This theory proposes a fundamental shift in how you approached the hunt. It was no longer about physical superiority, it was about cognitive superiority. The contest was not a race between your body and the prey's body, but a battle between your mind and the prey's instincts. To win, you had to outthink the animal. This is a profoundly demanding way to hunt. It requires deep, almost scholarly knowledge of your prey's habits. You have to know their migration routes, their daily watering schedules, their predictable reactions to fear. But even more importantly, you have to know your own territory with an impossible intimacy. You have to treat the entire landscape as a weapon. For a long time, this was just a compelling idea. But in the 21st century, new technologies allowed scientists to find the hard evidence to back it up. A geologist named Simon Kubler, in a landmark 2015 study, decided to investigate an ancient hominin site in Kenya not by looking down at the fossils, but by looking at the very ground they were found in. Using modern geological mapping techniques that allow for the precise reconstruction of ancient landscapes, he peeled back the layers of time to see the world as you saw it, hundreds of thousands of years ago. He focused his work on the Great Rift Valley, the tectonically active cradle of humanity. This, he found, was no flat, featureless plain. This was a dynamic and complex landscape, shaped by millennia of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The ground was broken by fault scarps, small cliffs created by shifting tectonic plates. Ancient lava flows had formed ridges and rocky barriers. The terrain was naturally full of choke points, funnels, and dead ends. And then came the crucial discovery. The locations where archaeologists had found the dense accumulations of butchered, prime-aged animal bones were not random. They were situated at precisely these kinds of strategic topographical locations. The kill sites were in the traps. With this geological map in hand, you can finally picture the scene. You are no longer just a runner or a scavenger. You are a military strategist, and the landscape is your chessboard. You and your group know, for example, that a herd of giant buffalo follows the same path down to the river every morning. And you know that along that path there is a narrow gully, a place where a lava flow from an ancient volcano has created a passage with steep, rocky sides. This gully is your chosen kill zone. The hunt begins not with a chase, but with a plan. You don't run at the herd. Instead, a few members of your group reveal themselves at a distance, upwind from the buffalo. They make noise. They create a gentle, persistent pressure. The herd, wanting to avoid this perceived threat, does what is natural. It moves away, along the path of least resistance. You are not herding them like a sheepdog. You are simply nudging their instincts, guiding them towards a destination only you are aware of. As the pressure continues, they funnel themselves directly into the rocky gully. Suddenly, their greatest assets, their numbers, their speed, their ability to scatter, are gone. They are packed together, confused, with nowhere to run. At the other end of the gully, the rest of your hunting party, who have been waiting silently, hidden among the rocks, now emerge. The trap is sprung. In the chaos of the confined space, even the most powerful prime-aged bull is a vulnerable target. This hypothesis solves the mystery of the mortality profile. You could kill the strongest animals because you were clever enough to never face them on their own terms. You chose the battlefield, and this explains the immense evolutionary pressure for a bigger, more complex brain. Your greatest weapon wasn't the sharpened stick in your hand. It was the detailed, three-dimensional topographical map you carried in your head. A map that allowed you to see the landscape not as a place you lived in, but as a tool you could wield. This leap into the mind of a strategist, this ability to turn the landscape itself into a weapon, is a profound cognitive revolution. And like any great leap forward in the mind, it didn't just exist as an abstract plan. It left behind a tangible fingerprint, a physical calling card that you can hold in your hand today. You can see the evidence for this new, powerful brain in the evolution of the stone tools you were making. The archaeological record of your technology is a perfect mirror for the development of your mind. For 1,000,000 years, your ancestors, like Homo habilis, had used the simple Oldowan chopper. The goal of that technology was purely functional. You hit one rock with another to knock off a sharp flake. The shape of the core tool didn't really matter. It was an opportunistic technology for an opportunistic scavenger. But around 1.7 million years ago, coinciding with the rise of Homo erectus and his new, fire-fueled brain, a completely new kind of tool appears in the record. It is the signature technology of the next 1,000,000 years of human history, found from the plains of Africa to the river valleys of Europe and the forests of Asia. It's called the Achilles hand axe, and it is much more than just a tool. It is a work of art. It is a fossilized thought. A typical hand axe is a large, teardrop-shaped stone, sometimes pointed, sometimes more rounded, that has been carefully shaped on both sides, what archaeologists call bifacial. It has a stunning, deliberate symmetry that is far beyond anything required for a simple cutting edge. To understand the mental leap this represents, you have to think about the process of making one. To create an Oldowan tool, you just need to understand a basic principle of fracture mechanics. But to create a hand axe, you must begin with what scientists call a mental template. You have to be able to look at a large, shapeless cobble of flint and see, in your mind's eye, the perfect, symmetrical form of the finished tool hidden within it. This is an act of imagination, of imposing a preconceived idea onto the raw material of the world. Then, you have to execute a long and complex series of actions to make that idea a reality. You have to plan your strikes, sometimes dozens or even hundreds of them, in a precise sequence. You have to constantly turn the stone in your hands, preparing a platform for the next strike, carefully thinning the edges without accidentally snapping the whole thing in half. Throughout this entire process, you have to hold that ideal symmetrical shape in your working memory as a constant guide. It is a staggering display of foresight, planning, multi-step processing, and abstract thought. Modern neuroscience has even given us a window into this ancient mind. When scientists put modern people who have learned flint knapping into an fMRI scanner, they find that the process of making an Achilles hand axe activates the prefrontal cortex, your brain's center for executive function and planning, and even parts of the brain, like Broca's area, that are essential for language. The function of these beautiful objects is still a source of rich, scholarly debate. Were they the Swiss Army knife of the Paleolithic, an all-purpose tool for butchering, chopping wood, and digging? Were they sometimes thrown, like a stone discus, to trip up fleeing animals? Or did their perfect symmetry give them a value beyond mere utility? In fact, one of the quirky mysteries of archaeology is that many hand axes are found in pristine, unused condition, leading some to speculate they might have also served as a social signal, a way for a skilled individual to demonstrate their intelligence, fitness, and foresight to a potential mate. But whatever their specific use, their existence is a smoking gun. The mind that could look at a random piece of flint and see a perfectly symmetrical tool is the very same mind that could look at a random landscape and see the perfect location for a trap. The mind that could patiently execute a 100-step plan to create that tool is the same mind that could coordinate the complex, multi-part plan of a cooperative ambush. The Achilles hand axe is the proof. It shows that your ancestors, like Homo erectus and his even bigger-brained successor, Homo heidelbergensis, were no longer just reacting to the world. They were imposing their will, their ideas, and their plans upon it. That leap into a mind capable of abstract thought and long-term planning so beautifully fossilized in the Achilles hand axe, is only half of the story. It's one thing for you, as a single individual, to have a brilliant idea. It's another thing entirely to get a dozen other individuals, each with their own fears, impulses, and perspectives, to understand, believe in, and execute that same idea flawlessly. The ambush hunt wasn't just a cognitive challenge, it was a social one. It required a level of teamwork and communication that was utterly unprecedented in the animal kingdom. Let's return to the scene of the crime, the gully trap. Think about the sheer complexity of that operation. It's like a silent, prehistoric heist movie. You have two separate teams that need to act in perfect coordination. The first team, the beaters, has the delicate job of nudging a herd of 1,000-pound, heavily armed animals in a specific direction. They can't be too aggressive, or the herd will panic and scatter in a direction you don't want. They can't be too passive, or the herd will ignore them. They have to apply just the right amount of pressure at just the right time. Meanwhile, the second team, the ambushers, must wait at the kill site. They have to be perfectly hidden and perfectly silent, for hours perhaps. They need to have absolute trust that the other team is doing its job and will deliver the herd as promised. If one person moves too soon or makes a sound, the entire painstakingly planned operation fails. How do you coordinate this? How do you even explain the plan in the first place? Simple grunts and pointing gestures aren't going to cut it. This operation requires a shared understanding of a multi-step sequence of future events. This is where you develop one of the most profound human abilities, what psychologists call a theory of mind. This is the recognition that the other beings around you are not just objects moving through the landscape. They are agents with minds of their own. You understand that your hunting partner has intentions, knowledge, and beliefs that are separate from yours. You can put yourself in their shoes and see the world and the plan from their perspective. This is the absolute foundation of all meaningful teamwork. Without it, trust is impossible. The neurological basis for this may lie in what are called mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you see someone else perform that same action, giving you a simulated, first-hand experience of what another is doing and feeling. This intense need for sophisticated cooperation has led many scientists to believe that this was the crucible in which our most defining trait was forged. In the fierce and ongoing debate about the origins of language, cooperative hunting is one of the leading candidates for the primary evolutionary driver. The reason is simple. An ambush requires you to communicate about things that are not immediately present. Linguists call this crucial feature displacement. You need to be able to talk about the future. Tomorrow we will hunt. About distant locations. At the gully by the river. And about contingent plans. If the herd goes left, you make a noise. This requires symbols, grammar, and syntax. It requires a true language, however rudimentary, and the physical evidence suggests you were capable of it. The fossilized remains of your successor, Homo heidelbergensis, include a small U-shaped bone from the throat called the hyoid bone. This bone is critical for anchoring the tongue and larynx, and its shape in these ancestors is virtually identical to your own. This is a mainstream historical fact, suggesting their vocal tract was capable of producing the same wide range of articulate sounds as modern humans. The hardware for speech was in place. The ambush hunt provided the intense, high-stakes software update needed to make it run. The hunt, then, was more than a way to get calories. It was a social forge, creating a powerful feedback loop. Better communication led to more successful hunts. More successful hunts meant more high-quality nutrition. And that nutrition fueled the continued growth of the very brain that was making the communication possible in the first place. This new kind of mind, a mind that can plan, communicate, and cooperate, is a powerful but invisible superpower. And for a long time, the evidence for it was indirect, inferred from the patterns left on bones and the shapes of stone tools. But sometimes, archaeology provides a gift. Sometimes, the chaos of deep time preserves a single moment with astonishing clarity. To see your new mind in action, you don't need to imagine a hypothetical scenario. You just need to travel forward in time and north in space to a place called Boxgrove in southern England and visit a perfectly preserved 500,000-year-old crime scene. 500,000 years ago, this was not the gentle green landscape of modern Sussex. It was a wild, chilly coastal plain teeming with enormous animals. At the base of a chalk cliff, your ancestors, the big-brained species known as Homo heidelbergensis, established a butchering site, and the evidence they left behind, buried for millennia under layers of silt, is breathtaking. Archaeologists unearthed a carpet of tens of thousands of stone artifacts, including hundreds of exquisitely crafted Achilles hand axes, looking as sharp and perfect as the day they were made. But these tools were not alone. They were mixed in with the massive, fossilized bones of the animals your ancestors were eating. Not small gazelles or deer. These were the bones of giant, extinct horses, and most impressively, several two-horned rhinoceroses. And the evidence is clear that this was no scavenging site. Microwear analysis, which examines the microscopic polishes and scratches on the tools, provided the scientific evidence that they had been used for heavy-duty butchering, slicing through thick hide, dismembering limbs, and stripping meat from bone. The bones themselves showed the telltale cut marks of this process. This was a place where huge animals were being systematically processed for consumption. And among the thousands of bones, the archaeologists found a single, definitive clue, a piece of evidence as clear as a modern ballistics report. It was the shoulder blade of a horse, and piercing the very center of this flat bone was a neat, semicircular hole about 1.5 inches in diameter. The bone had begun to heal around the wound, indicating the horse didn't die instantly. This quirky but crucial artifact is the smoking gun. It is the precise puncture wound that would be left by a thick, sharpened wooden spear. It is a frozen snapshot of the hunt itself, the moment of impact between your ancestor's weapon and his prey. For a long time, the weapons themselves were missing. Wood, after all, rots and disappears, leaving only speculative holes in bones to mark its passage. But then, in the 1990s, another gift from the past. In a coal mine in Schöningen, Germany, miners uncovered a collection of the oldest and most perfectly preserved hunting weapons ever found. There, sealed in the low oxygen mud of an ancient lakeside, were 8 wooden spears, dating back a staggering 400,000 years. This historical fact changed everything we thought we knew about the sophistication of your ancestors. These are not crude, sharpened sticks. These are masterpieces of woodworking technology. They are over 6 feet long, crafted from the strong, straight trunks of spruce trees. The tips are carved to a fine point from the hardest part of the wood at the base of the tree. Most astonishingly, they are aerodynamically shaped. The thickest and heaviest part of the spear is about 1/3 of the way down from the tip, which is the exact same center of gravity and point of balance as a modern competition javelin. This is not an accident. This is a design of profound sophistication, made to be thrown with accuracy and velocity. The scholarly debate continues as to whether they were primarily used as thrown javelins or as close-quarters thrusting lances, but their craftsmanship is undeniable. Together, the sites at Boxgrove and Schoningen give you the complete picture. Boxgrove provides the crime scene, the victims, and the butchering tools. Schoningen provides the murder weapons. This is the undeniable proof that your ancestors, the brilliant and resourceful Homo heidelbergensis, were not just marginal scavengers or desperate persistence hunters. They were organized, well-equipped, and highly intelligent big-game hunters, capable of planning and executing complex hunts on the most dangerous animals in their world. The ambush predator was no longer just a theory. It was a proven reality. The world of Homo heidelbergensis, with its javelins and coordinated rhino hunts, proves that the ambush strategy was a spectacular success. And as populations of this big-brained ancestor spread across the Old World, they began to adapt to new and challenging environments. The lineage that remained in Africa would eventually lead to you and me, Homo sapiens. But the populations that pushed north into the frigid, glacier-scarred landscapes of Ice Age Europe would evolve into a different kind of human altogether. For hundreds of thousands of years, they were the undisputed masters of that frozen continent. They are your closest extinct relatives, and perhaps the most misunderstood and unfairly maligned members of our entire family tree, the Neanderthals. For over a century since their first discovery, the name Neanderthal has been a synonym for brutish stupidity. The popular image is of a hunched, club-wielding, knuckle-dragging caveman, a failed evolutionary experiment that was mercifully replaced by his more intelligent and sophisticated successor. This image is almost entirely wrong. The ongoing debate about the full extent of their cognitive and cultural abilities is still a hot topic in science, but one thing is now abundantly clear. The Neanderthals were not stupid. They were hyper-apex predators, a species so perfectly and terrifyingly adapted to their environment that they thrived at the top of the Ice Age food chain for a staggering 350,000 years. To understand them, you have to understand their world and their bodies. You are a Neanderthal now, and your body is a masterpiece of biological engineering for life in the cold. You are shorter and more powerfully built than your African cousins. Your chest is huge and barrel-shaped. Your limbs are stocky and muscular. This compact, robust physique is a perfect adaptation for conserving heat in a cold climate. But it's also a body built for power, not for the marathon running of your Homo erectus ancestors. You are hunting in a world of giants, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant cave bears, and elk with antlers 10 feet across. This is not prey you can run to exhaustion. This is prey that you have to confront. The evidence for your prowess as a hunter is overwhelming. Scientists can now reconstruct ancient diets by analyzing the stable isotopes of elements like carbon and nitrogen preserved in fossilized bone. The scientific evidence from Neanderthal bones is unambiguous. The nitrogen isotope levels in their skeletons are consistently higher than any other predator in their ecosystem, including cave lions and hyenas. This is the chemical signature of a hypercarnivore, an animal that gets almost all of its protein from the flesh of large herbivores. You were not just occasionally hunting, you were the top predator of the Ice Age. But this incredibly successful hunting lifestyle came at a brutal cost. When paleontologists examine Neanderthal skeletons, particularly those of adult males, they find a shocking rate of traumatic injury. Healed fractures are everywhere, on the skull, the arms, the ribs, the legs. Life as a Neanderthal hunter was a brutal, bone-breaking affair. In a now famous and quirky piece of scientific analysis, researchers compared this pattern of injury to various modern human populations. They found that the frequency and location of Neanderthal trauma most closely matched one very specific and very dangerous profession: modern professional rodeo riders. This is the signature of a life spent in repeated, violent, close-quarters encounters with large, angry animals. This all points to one conclusion. You were the ultimate master of the ambush. You used the strategic, landscape-reading intelligence of your ancestors to get incredibly close to your enormous prey. But the final act was not one of graceful, long-distance projectiles. It was an explosive, terrifying confrontation. You and your hunting party would use your immense physical strength to surround and bring down a mammoth, using heavy, fire-hardened spears not as javelins, but as powerful thrusting lances. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the most successful survival strategy on the planet. You were not a clumsy brute. You were a brilliant, fearless, and perfectly adapted specialist, the undisputed king of the frozen north. For this entire story, the spotlight has been on you, your body, your tools, your mind, your society. The animals you hunted have been treated as a resource, a sort of mobile calorie puzzle for you to solve. But they were not just passive pieces on your chessboard. They were active players in the game, and their own survival depended on learning your rules and developing counter-moves. Your evolution as a master hunter did not happen in a vacuum. It triggered a response, setting in motion a multi-million-year-long high-stakes evolutionary arms race. This concept is a central theme in biology, sometimes known by the mainstream historical name of the Red Queen hypothesis, taken from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. The Red Queen tells Alice, "It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." For species in a competitive ecosystem, evolution is not just about getting ahead. It's about not falling behind. As you became a more effective, intelligent, and coordinated predator, you exerted an immense and entirely new kind of selective pressure on the animals you hunted. The prey that survived were not the lucky ones. They were the ones who were, in some small way, better at avoiding you. Think about the new threat you represented. For millions of years, these herds of giant buffalo and wild horses had evolved defenses against the great sprinting predators like saber-toothed cats and the stamina-based pack hunters like hyenas. Their defense was speed, herd cohesion, and brute strength. But you were different. You didn't challenge their speed or their strength directly. You challenged their minds. You learned their routines, predicted their movements, and used their own instincts against them. An animal that was merely fast was still vulnerable if it was also predictable. And so, over thousands of generations, the prey began to adapt. The herds that were more vigilant, the ones with a few individuals who were constantly scanning the horizon for unnatural movements, were more likely to spot your ambush before it was sprung. Animals with a slightly keener sense of smell might detect you hiding downwind. Those with sharper hearing might catch the sound of a dislodged pebble. These hyper-aware individuals would survive and pass on their genes, and slowly, the entire prey population would become more wary, more skittish, and infinitely harder to hunt. Their social structures may have even changed in response to your tactics, favoring larger, more cohesive herds that were harder to split up and funnel into your traps. This co-evolutionary arms race is likely the answer to a quirky but fascinating modern question. Why are African animals so notoriously difficult to hunt and even to approach on safari? The leading theory is that these are the animals that never got a break. They are the direct descendants of the herds that spent millions of years being hunted by you and your ancestors. They have hunter smarts built into their very DNA. This is in stark contrast to the so-called naive fauna of places like the Americas and Australia. When the first humans arrived on those continents, they found animals that had never encountered a predator who hunted with your kind of intelligence. The giant ground sloths and woolly mammoths of North America had no innate fear of a small, upright primate with a pointy stick, and the result was a catastrophic wave of extinctions. This constant adaptation by your prey created a relentless feedback loop. The gully trap that was so effective for your grandparents might become a no-go zone for the next generation of buffalo who have learned to associate it with danger. The simple act of creating a disturbance to spook the herd might stop working as they become wise to the trick. As your prey got smarter, your existing strategies would start to fail. This put the evolutionary pressure right back on you. The only way to win this escalating arms race was to become an even better hunter. You had to become more innovative, more cooperative, and more communicative. You had to develop better tools and more complex, unpredictable strategies. The ongoing scholarly debate considers the relative impacts of your hunting versus climate change on the evolution of these animals. But your role was undoubtedly immense. Your intelligence was the forge, and the evolving wits of your prey was the hammer, and together they sharpened your mind to a razor's edge. Your superpower was not a static trait you simply acquired. It was a muscle that was forced to grow stronger with every single generation in a deadly dance with the animals you sought to eat. This relentless million-year-long arms race between your ancestors and their prey forged a mind of incredible power and flexibility. In the cold lands of Europe, it produced the Neanderthal, a specialized master of the close-quarters ambush. But back in the African cradle, that same crucible of pressure was shaping another kind of human. A new model with a slightly different brain. One with perhaps a greater capacity for symbolic thought, for innovation, and for networking in larger social groups. This was your direct ancestor. This was Homo sapiens. Around 100,000 years ago, armed with this new mind and a sophisticated new toolkit, you began to expand out of Africa in a wave of migration that would eventually colonize the entire planet. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. This is where you see what happens when a predator, honed to a razor's edge in the hyper-competitive boot camp of Africa, is suddenly released into a world that is completely unprepared for it. The co-evolutionary arms race had created a kind of dynamic balance in the old world. But in the new worlds you were about to discover, the prey had never met a killer like you. They were naive, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Your first major landfall was the continent of Australia, which you likely reached by a boat around 65,000 years ago. The Australia you discovered was a world of bizarre giants, a menagerie of oversized marsupials that had evolved in splendid isolation for millions of years. There were giant kangaroos that stood 10 feet tall. There were marsupial lions, fearsome pouch-bearing predators. And there was the quirky and enormous Diprotodon, a relative of the wombat that grew to the size of a rhinoceros. These animals had their own predators, but they had never encountered a creature that hunted with coordinated, forward-planning intelligence. Then you arrived, and the fossil record tells a stark and sudden story. Within a few thousand years of your appearance on the continent, a geological eye blink, nearly all of these magnificent megafauna vanish. The correlation in time between the first evidence of your presence and the last evidence of their existence is staggeringly precise. Tens of thousands of years later, you would repeat the experiment on an even grander scale. Sometime around 15,000 years ago, your ancestors crossed the Bering Strait land bridge from Siberia into the Americas. They entered a hemisphere that was, until that moment, completely human-free. And it was a paradise for giant mammals. There were woolly mammoths and mastodons, great herds of horses and camels, dire wolves, short-faced bears bigger than any grizzly, and saber-toothed cats. There were giant ground sloths, some as tall as a giraffe, lumbering through the woodlands. Into this world came a small population of humans, known to archaeologists as the Clovis people, carrying a new and deadly toolkit, including exquisitely crafted spear points. And the story repeats itself, but with even more brutal speed. As the Clovis points spread rapidly across North America, the megafauna disappear in their wake. Within just 1,000 or 2,000 years, dozens of species of large mammals are gone forever. Now, this is the subject of a fierce and ongoing scientific debate, often called the overkill versus overchill hypothesis. The overchill argument posits that the primary culprit was the dramatic climate change at the end of the last ice age, which radically reordered ecosystems and put these large animals under immense stress. This is undoubtedly a huge part of the story, but the overkill proponents point to the devastatingly coincidental timing. These species had survived numerous ice ages and climate shifts before. The one new and deadly variable during this particular extinction event was you. The most likely scenario is that it was a tragic combination of both. Animal populations already stressed and fragmented by a changing climate were hit with a new super predator they had no defense against. Your arrival was the knockout blow. This was the dark side of your superpower. Your cognitive flexibility, your advanced projectile weapons, your unparalleled cooperation, it all combined to make you the most successful and devastating invasive species the world has ever seen. You were so good at what you did that you didn't just hunt your prey. You hunted it to extinction, fundamentally and permanently reshaping the ecology of entire continents. You had ceased to be just another animal. You had become a geological force. What was it that made you, the newly arrived Homo sapiens, such a uniquely devastating force? It wasn't just your brain, as capable as it was. It wasn't just your social organization. It was the way your brain and your social world came together to create a revolutionary new kind of technology. Your ancestors, like the Neanderthals, had become masters of the close-quarters hunt. It was an effective, but brutal and high-risk way of life. You, on the other hand, invented a new way of doing things. You invented death from a distance. You mastered the art of the projectile, a technological leap that would completely rewrite the rules of the predator-prey relationship. The first major innovation in this revolution was a deceptively simple device known as the atlatl, or spear thrower. An atlatl is essentially just a stick, usually about 1 foot or 2 long, with a hook or a spur at one end that engages the base of a spear. But this simple stick is one of the most brilliant applications of physics in the ancient world. It functions as a lever, effectively adding an extra joint and a much longer arc to your throwing arm. The scientific evidence from a simple physics analysis is clear. This system multiplies the force and speed of the projectile. A spear, or dart, as the projectiles used with an atlatl are called, can leave the thrower's hand at speeds of over 90 miles per hour, hitting with a level of kinetic energy that is simply impossible to achieve with a hand-thrown spear. Even today, in a quirky modern revival, Atlatl sport competitions are held where skilled users can hurl a dart over hundreds of yards with pinpoint accuracy. The Atlatl fundamentally changed the risk-reward calculation of the hunt. You no longer had to be like the Neanderthal rodeo rider, engaging in a life-or-death wrestling match with a giant beast. You could now stand at a much safer distance, 30, 40, even 50 yards away, and deliver a powerful, penetrating blow. It was still dangerous, but it was a calculated risk, not a near-suicidal charge. Multiple hunters, armed with atlatls, could bring down large game with a volley of deadly projectiles, bleeding the animal out from a distance before closing in for the final kill. But even the Atlatl was just a stepping stone to the ultimate projectile weapon system, an invention of such complexity and genius that it would dominate hunting and warfare for the next 60,000 years. That invention was the bow and arrow. The earliest definitive historical evidence for this technology comes from Sibudu Cave in South Africa, where archaeologists found tiny, precisely crafted stone arrowheads dating back to around 64,000 years ago, proving this was a core innovation of our African ancestors. The cognitive leap required to invent the bow and arrow is staggering. This is not a single tool. It is a complex, multi-component system, and every single part of it must be perfectly designed and manufactured for the whole to work. First, you need the bow itself, crafted from a carefully selected piece of wood that has the perfect combination of flexibility and tensile strength to store and release a massive amount of energy. Then you need the bowstring, made from twisted animal sinew or plant fibers, a material that has to be incredibly strong and resistant to stretching. Then you have the arrow, a shaft that must be light and perfectly straight, fletched with feathers at the back for aerodynamic stability, and tipped at the front with a small razor-sharp stone point. This is a level of composite tool-making far beyond the hand axe. It requires a deep, almost scientific understanding of different materials and their properties. It demands immense foresight, planning, and a mastery of fine motor skills. And the ongoing debate among archaeologists about exactly when and where it spread across the globe highlights its revolutionary impact. The bow and arrow offered huge advantages over the atlatl. It was quieter, allowing for a stealthier hunt. It could be fired more rapidly, and it could be used from a kneeling or prone position, making it the perfect weapon for the patient, intelligent ambush hunter. It was the technological fulfillment of the strategy your ancestors had been developing for 1,000,000 years. This is what made you unstoppable. Your unique, flexible mind could invent such a system, and your cooperative social groups could deploy it with lethal, coordinated precision. This technological revolution, the mastery of death from a distance, represents the final perfection of your hunting abilities. With the atlatl and the bow and arrow, the balance of power between you and the animal world shifts irrevocably. Hunting becomes safer, more efficient, and more reliable than ever before. For the first time in your long history, securing meat is no longer a desperate, all-consuming struggle for survival. You are no longer just getting by. You are thriving. And this newfound security, this surplus of calories and time, creates the space for your brain to start using its incredible power for something other than pure problem-solving. The hunt begins to transform. It evolves from a purely practical activity into the bedrock of your culture, your art, and your spiritual life. To witness this transformation, you have to leave the sunlit world of the hunt behind and journey somewhere else entirely. You have to go deep into the earth. Let's travel to southern France, some 30,000 years ago. You follow a guide, carrying a small, flickering lamp made of a hollowed-out stone filled with animal fat. You enter a small opening at the base of a limestone cliff and descend into the total, absolute darkness of a cave. You squeeze through narrow, winding passages, your shoulders scraping against the cold, damp rock. You are moving deeper and deeper into the belly of the world, into a place of profound silence and stillness. And then, your guide raises their lamp, and the light dances across the walls, and you see them. Horses, lions, mammoths, and rhinos, their outlines engraved into the rock and painted in rich black and red pigments. This is the Chauvet Cave, discovered by spelunkers in 1994, an underground cathedral of art so old and so perfectly preserved that it rewrites the history of human creativity. The scientific evidence from carbon-14 dating of the charcoal used in the drawings proves they are over 30,000 years old, twice as old as the more famous paintings at Lascaux. The art is breathtaking. These are not crude stick figures. These are masterpieces of observation and technique, created by people with a deep, intimate knowledge of the animals they shared the world with. You see a pride of cave lions, their heads all turned in the same direction, as if they are stalking something in the darkness beyond your lamp. You see a herd of horses, their heads tossing, their nostrils flared, so full of motion you can almost hear their hooves thundering against the ground. The artists used the natural bulges and curves of the cave wall to give their animals a stunning, three-dimensional quality. And yet, for all this vibrant life, the subject matter is strangely narrow. It is a world almost exclusively of animals. There are very few human figures, and they are usually simple stick drawings. There are no trees, no rivers, no landscapes. It is an art that is utterly obsessed with the great beasts of the Ice Age. The very existence of these subterranean galleries poses what remains one of the greatest and most fiercely debated questions in all of human history. Why? What is this art for? These were not living spaces. They were deep, dangerous, and difficult to access. Creating these paintings required a huge investment of time and resources. There have been many theories. The first and simplest was the idea of hunting magic. Perhaps by painting a bison with a spear in its side, you were magically ensuring the success of a future hunt. A second theory suggests the caves were a kind of record, a gallery of past triumphs. But a more modern and complex theory sees these caves as sacred space. Portals to a spirit world. The animals are not just animals. They are spirit guides, deities, or symbols of powerful natural forces. The journey into the deep, disorienting darkness of the cave may have been part of a shamanistic ritual designed to induce a trance state. Some researchers even point to the abstract grids and dots that accompany the animals, suggesting they might be representations of the quirky neurological light shows, the entoptic phenomena that people see when in such a state. We will likely never know for sure. But the mystery itself is the point. The fact that you would venture into the underworld to create these transcendent works of art proves that the animals you hunted were no longer just a source of food. They had become a source of meaning. The hunt was no longer just a job. It had become the central organizing principle of your reality, a deep, complex, and spiritual relationship between the human world and the animal world. As the hunt becomes the centerpiece of your spiritual world, it also inevitably becomes the engine of your social world. With your new, hyper-effective projectile technologies, the acquisition of meat is no longer a matter of desperate, opportunistic luck. It is a system. And this reliability changes the very meaning of the food itself. The act of sharing meat, which began as a simple economic strategy for survival, evolves into something far more complex. It becomes a form of social currency. In your society, you now have what anthropologists call a prestige economy, running in parallel to your subsistence economy. The subsistence economy, based on the reliable daily gathering of plants and tubers, is what keeps everyone alive. It's the baseline. But the prestige economy, the system in which status, reputation, and social power are negotiated, runs on meat. When you, as a hunter, bring back a large kill, a giant elk or a prize bison, you are bringing back more than just calories and protein. You are making a public statement. You are demonstrating your skill, your knowledge of the landscape, your courage, and your ability to provide a valuable, high-risk resource. This public demonstration builds your reputation, and in a small, tight-knit society, reputation is everything. A good reputation makes you a more desirable mate, a more valuable ally. The act of giving away the shares of your kill is not just generosity, it's a strategic social investment. You are creating a web of obligation and reciprocity. The family you give a prime cut to today is a family that will support you in a dispute tomorrow. The other hunters who shared in your success are now bonded to you, more likely to join you on the next hunt and to share their kills with you when they are the successful ones. The whole process is a real-world demonstration of what scientific game theory predicts. In a community that relies on cooperation, sharing a high-risk, high-reward resource is the most logical long-term strategy for building trust and mitigating individual failure. But this new system of prestige creates a dangerous new social problem: the risk of arrogance. A hunter who becomes too successful, too proud, could potentially threaten the delicate, egalitarian balance of the group. And so, your society develops a fascinating and quirky cultural tool to manage this. Ethnographers studying the San peoples of the Kalahari have documented a practice known as insulting the meat. When a hunter brings a huge kill back to the camp, the others do not praise him. Instead, they belittle the kill. They'll say, "What is this?" "Just a skinny little thing." "I suppose we'll have to make do." This is not a genuine insult. It is a sophisticated social performance, a ritualized act of humility. It reinforces the core value of the group. The meat belongs to everyone, and the hunter is merely an agent of the community. It is a way to celebrate the success without elevating the individual above the collective. The very existence of this practice shows how central and how potentially disruptive the prestige of the hunt had become. This social importance is most clearly seen in the way the hunt functions as a rite of passage. A young boy in your group spends his entire childhood in training. He learns to identify animal tracks, to craft his own tools, to move silently through the landscape. But he is not considered a man in the eyes of the community simply by reaching a certain age. He must prove himself. He must make his first significant kill and, just as importantly, bring the meat back to be shared according to the ancient rules. This first hunt is the ultimate test. It's a demonstration that he has mastered the necessary physical skills, but it's also a test of his character. Does he have the patience to wait for the right moment? Does he have the courage to face a dangerous animal? And when he succeeds, does he have the social grace to understand that his prize is not his alone? By successfully making his kill and sharing it with the group, he graduates. He transforms from a boy who consumes into a man who provides. The debate about the deep origins of social inequality often begins here, with the immense prestige granted to the skilled hunter. But in your world, that prestige was always balanced by the profound social obligation to share. You have now mastered your tools, your landscape, and your own complex social world. The hunt has become the engine of your culture, your art, and your society. It seems you have every advantage. But there was another intelligent, cooperative, and highly successful pack hunter on the Ice Age landscape. For hundreds of thousands of years, they were your direct competitors, and at times, your mortal enemies. They hunted the same prey, stalked the same valleys, and understood the power of a coordinated attack just as well as you did. This other great hunter was the Grey Wolf. For most of your shared history, the relationship was one of mutual respect and intense competition. You likely stole kills from each other, fought over territory, and viewed one another with a wary eye. A lone human was no match for a wolf pack, and a lone wolf was vulnerable to a party of human hunters. But sometime during the late Ice Age, in a process that remains one of the most fascinating and debated questions in prehistory, something remarkable happened. The competition ended. An alliance was formed. From the heart of your greatest rival, you forged your greatest partner. You domesticated the dog. The precise origin of this partnership is still a mystery. The genetic evidence based on the mainstream historical fact of comparing modern dog and wolf DNA suggests it happened sometime between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago, likely from a population of ancient wolves that has since gone extinct. But the scholarly debate rages on about how it happened. One theory suggests that the wolves, in a way, domesticated themselves. The less fearful, more opportunistic individuals in a wolf pack may have started shadowing your hunting parties, or hanging around the edges of your campsites, drawn by the irresistible smell of roasting meat. You would have tolerated these bolder but less aggressive wolves, who acted as a useful alarm system, barking at the approach of more dangerous predators like cave lions or the terrifying dire wolf. Over many generations, this created a new population of wolves that was genetically predisposed to coexist with humans. The other theory is that you took a more active role. Perhaps a hunter found a den of orphaned wolf pups and, out of curiosity or compassion, brought them back to the camp. Raised within the human family, these wolves would have bonded with your group, a process known as imprinting. The reality is likely a messy combination of both scenarios, a long, slow dance of mutual adaptation that played out over thousands of years around the flickering light of your campfires. But however it began, the result was a military and economic alliance of unprecedented power. This was not about finding a cute, furry pet. This was the fusion of the two most intelligent predators on the continent, a partnership where the strengths of each species perfectly compensated for the weaknesses of the other. The wolves brought their superior senses. Their ability to smell is almost beyond our comprehension, 100,000 times more acute than our own. Their hearing can detect the faintest sounds from miles away. They brought their speed and stamina, their ability to chase and harry prey relentlessly. You, in turn, brought your strategic mind and your lethal technology. You could read the subtle cues in your new partner's behavior, the tilt of a head, the stiffening of a tail, and formulate a complex plan of attack. And you, with your atlatl or bow and arrow, could deliver a fatal blow from a safe distance, a feat the wolf could never accomplish on its own. Imagine the cooperative hunt. The newly domesticated dogs race ahead, their noses to the ground, easily finding a trail that would be invisible to you. They locate the prey, perhaps a herd of reindeer, and begin the chase. They don't have to make the kill. Their job is to run, to flank, to nip at the heels, to confuse and separate a chosen animal from the herd, and to hold it at bay, all while barking to signal their location back to you. You, following at a human pace, arrive on the scene to find the prey animal exhausted and distracted, its attention fixed on the circling dogs. This gives you the perfect opportunity to get into position, draw your bow, and make a clean, effective kill. This synergistic team was exponentially more effective than either hunter was alone. The archaeological record shows that this was more than a partnership of convenience. Ancient burials of dogs, some showing the animals were cared for well into old age after suffering debilitating injuries, serve as the scientific evidence for a deep, emotional bond. They were not just tools, they were companions. This interspecies superpower, the ability to form a cooperative bond with another predator, was a game changer. It may well have been the critical advantage that allowed you to outcompete and ultimately survive the other human species, like the Neanderthals, who, for all their strength and intelligence, never seem to have forged this same revolutionary alliance. You have reached the absolute zenith of the hunting and gathering world. With a brilliant mind, a cooperative society, advanced projectile weapons, and a powerful canine ally, you are the undisputed master of your domain. For over 99% of the time that modern humans have existed, this was the only way of life. The rhythms of the seasonal hunt, the patient work of gathering, the social bonds of the campfire, this was the water your spirit swam in. And then, in a geological blink of an eye, you gave it all up. You embarked on the single most radical and consequential transformation in the history of our species, an event that would end the 2-million-year-long story of the hunt. We call it the Neolithic Revolution. It began slowly, around 12,000 years ago, as the last great ice age was finally thawing. As a mainstream historical fact, it wasn't a single event, but a process that occurred independently in several different parts of the world, from the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East to the river valleys of China and the highlands of Mesoamerica. For reasons that are still the subject of intense scholarly debate, you started to experiment. You learned that the seeds from certain grasses could be collected, planted, and cultivated, producing a predictable and storable harvest of wheat, rice, or corn. This was the birth of agriculture. At the same time, you applied your deep ancestral knowledge of animal behavior to a new problem. Instead of stalking and killing the wild sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle, you learned to capture them, to manage their breeding, and to contain them in herds. The dangerous, unpredictable art of the hunt was replaced by the patient, controlling science of pastoralism. Your prey became your property. The hunt, as a way of life, was over. This revolution turned your entire world upside down. The nomadic, roaming existence that your body and mind were built for came to a sudden end. Why wander in search of food when you could grow a massive surplus of it right outside your door? You became sedentary. You built the first permanent houses, which became the first villages, which would eventually grow into the first towns and cities. This new, stable food supply allowed for a population explosion, completely rewriting the demographic destiny of your species. On the surface, it seems like the ultimate triumph, the final victory in the long struggle for survival. But the skeletons of these first farmers tell a different, much darker story. The scientific evidence from paleopathology, the study of ancient disease and health, is startling. When researchers compare the remains of the last hunter-gatherers to the first agriculturalists who replaced them, they find that the farmers were, in many ways, a walking disaster. This quirky but disturbing fact is that they were often significantly shorter than their foraging ancestors, a clear sign of poorer nutrition. Their teeth are riddled with cavities and abscesses, a consequence of a new, high-carbohydrate diet, and they show horizontal lines of enamel hypoplasia, which are permanent markers of severe malnutrition or disease during childhood. The hunter-gatherer diet was incredibly varied, a wide portfolio of different plants, animals, nuts, and insects. The farmer's diet, by contrast, was dangerously monotonous, often based on a single starchy crop. This led to chronic deficiencies in essential vitamins and minerals. Furthermore, living in permanent settlements, in close quarters with your domesticated animals and your own accumulated waste, created the perfect breeding ground for infectious diseases and parasites. The first villages were the first epicenters of epidemics. This has led some scholars, like Jared Diamond, to provocatively call the agricultural revolution the worst mistake in the history of the human race, arguing that it led to a decline in individual health, the rise of social inequality, and a life of much harder labor. Whether it was a mistake or not, its consequences are undeniable. For 2 million years, your body and mind were exquisitely sculpted by the pressures of a specific lifestyle. You evolved to be a long-distance traveler, a master of the landscape. You evolved to eat a diverse, omnivorous diet. Your brain evolved to solve the complex, high-stakes problems of the cooperative hunt. And then, in just a few thousand years, you put yourself in a completely new and alien environment. The hunt was over, but the hunter's body, the hunter's appetite, and the hunter's mind lived on, trapped in a farmer's world. This is the great mismatch, the ghost in your machine that you still live with today. That abrupt shift into the agricultural world left you in a strange and difficult position. You are now a Stone Age hunter, living in a digital, urbanized world. The old world that forged you is gone, but the person it created, your body, your brain, your deepest instincts, is still right here. The ancient software is still running. And if you know where to look, you can see the echoes of that 2 million year long hunt everywhere in our modern lives. The hunter is a ghost that haunts our present, its whispers shaping our passions, our rituals, and our most cherished relationships. Consider the modern phenomenon of the ultramarathon, where people willingly pay money to run 50 or 100 miles through brutal terrain. From a purely logical standpoint, this is absurd. It's painful, it's exhausting, and it has no practical purpose. But from the perspective of your deep history, it makes perfect sense. You are tapping into the latent hardware of the persistence hunter, and your body rewards you for it. The feeling that marathon runners know as the runner's high is a very real neurochemical event. The scientific evidence shows that after a prolonged period of endurance exercise, your brain releases a flood of endorphins and endocannabinoids, chemicals that are structurally similar to morphine and cannabis. They produce a feeling of euphoria, reduce pain, and create a sense of calm. The quirky but compelling theory is that this is an ancient reward system, a piece of evolutionary programming designed to encourage you to push through the pain and discomfort of a multi-hour pursuit. The ultramarathoner is simply an ancient instinct finding a new, ritualized outlet. Think, too, of the mental state required for a successful hunt. The hours of tracking, of waiting silently in an ambush, demand a unique and total state of concentration. All distractions must fall away. Your sense of self, your anxieties, the passage of time, it all dissolves into the singular focus of the task at hand. This is a perfect description of what the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi famously termed the flow state. It's that feeling of being in the zone, a state of energized focus and effortless action that is sought after by athletes, artists, surgeons, musicians, and computer programmers. This coveted mental state, this pinnacle of modern performance, may simply be the echo of the hunter's mind, your brain's ancient high-stakes focus mode, now repurposed for the challenges of a new world. The social echoes are perhaps the most powerful of all. Remember the profound importance of the home base, the campfire, and the sharing of meat. This was the ritual that bonded your small group together, that turned a collection of individuals into a society. Does that sound familiar? Think of the modern backyard barbecue, the Thanksgiving dinner, or the simple act of having friends over for a meal. The ritual is identical. You gather your trusted social group. The successful hunter, the host, shares a high-value, celebratory food, the roasted turkey, the grilled steak, as a way of reaffirming social bonds. You gather around a controlled fire. You share stories. You strengthen your alliances. It is the most ancient and most human of all social technologies, still running perfectly after 500,000 years. And finally, look down at the foot of your bed, or curled up on the sofa. Your love for your dog, that deep and seemingly inexplicable bond we feel for another species, is perhaps the most living and breathing echo of our hunting past. That intuitive, almost telepathic communication you have with them, the shared joy of a long walk in the woods, their unwavering loyalty. It is the ghost of that ancient, synergistic alliance. They are the descendants of the partners who helped you track your prey and guard your camps. And you are the descendant of the partners who shared the warmth of the fire and the spoils of the hunt. That relationship is written into both of our genomes. We may not hunt together for survival anymore, but the ancient contract of cooperation and companionship remains, a living testament to the world we left behind. These echoes of your ancient life, the runner's high, the flow state, the backyard barbecue, are mostly positive, a source of joy and connection in a world that has largely forgotten them. But the ghost of the hunter that lives inside you has a darker side. When an ancient piece of software is forced to run in a completely alien operating system, you don't just get charming echoes, you get glitches, bugs, and system-wide crashes. This is the core idea behind a field of study known as evolutionary medicine, and its central concept is the mismatch hypothesis. It argues that many of our most persistent modern ailments, both physical and mental, are not the result of flaws in our design, but are the logical, predictable outcome of placing a body and a brain that were forged in the Pleistocene into the strange, high-tech environment of the 21st century. The most obvious and devastating of these mismatches is in your diet. For 2 million years, your brain and your metabolism were shaped by a world of profound and persistent scarcity. Calories were the currency of life, and they were incredibly difficult to acquire. In this environment, your brain evolved a powerful and brilliant survival mechanism, an intense, insatiable craving for 3 specific things: sugar, salt, and fat. Salt was a rare and essential mineral. Sugar, which you would only find in seasonal ripe fruit or a lucky honeycomb discovery, was a signal of a temporary, high-energy bonanza. And fat, found in the precious marrow and organs of a kill, was the most calorie-dense fuel source on the planet. To ensure you would seek these out at every opportunity, your brain created a powerful dopamine reward circuit that fires every time you consume them, making you feel good and want more. This was not a flaw. This was a feature, a life-saving adaptation in a calorie-poor world. Now, fast forward to the present day. You live in a world not of scarcity, but of overwhelming, unprecedented abundance. You have access to a global industrial food system that has learned to manufacture sugar, salt, and fat in their purest, most concentrated forms. And for pennies. That ancient survival circuit, hardwired into your brain for 1,000,000 years, has no idea that the world has changed. It still operates on the prime directive. If you see sugar, salt, or fat, you must consume it. The modern supermarket, with its aisles of hyper-palatable processed foods, is a minefield for your Stone Age brain. Your brilliant survival instinct has been hijacked, and the result is a catastrophic, slow-motion epidemic of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. The ongoing scholarly debate today is how we can possibly design a healthier food environment that works with our ancient programming instead of against it. An equally damaging mismatch can be found in your stress response. Your fight-or-flight system is another masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. When you faced an immediate, life-threatening physical danger, like being cornered by a cave lion, your body's hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis would roar to life. It would flood your system with adrenaline and cortisol, hormones that prepared you for a burst of violent physical exertion. Your heart rate would skyrocket, your blood vessels would constrict, and your liver would dump glucose into your bloodstream for instant energy. Non-essential systems like digestion and your immune response would be temporarily shut down to conserve resources. It was a system designed for short, terrifying, all-or-nothing encounters, after which, if you survived, your hormone levels would quickly return to normal. Today, your body still has that same emergency alert system. But the cave lions you face are no longer acute physical threats. They are a looming deadline at work. They are the notification buzz of a stressful email. They are the honking chaos of a traffic jam, or the relentless low-grade anxiety of a 24-hour news cycle. Your ancient brain doesn't know the difference. It dutifully triggers that same powerful fight-or-flight response. But because the threat is chronic and psychological, you never get the physical release that the system was designed for. You never fight, and you never flee. You just sit there, marinating in a low-level bath of stress hormones day after day. The result is a modern plague of chronic anxiety, depression, insomnia, and a compromised immune system. The survival switch that once saved your life is now stuck in the on position, slowly and systematically wearing your body down. So, after this long journey, from the terrified, hunted primate of the Pliocene to the master hunter of the Ice Age, from the first crude stone chopper to the transcendent art of the painted caves, from the agricultural revolution to the strange mismatches of our modern lives, we can finally return to the question we asked at the very beginning. What is the human body's secret superpower? The entire story we've just walked through reveals the answer, and it's both simpler and more profound than we might have imagined. Our secret superpower was never one single thing. It was not a killer's instinct, or a marathoner's endurance, or even a toolmaker's clever hands. Any theory that tries to pinpoint a single magic bullet trait will always be incomplete. The real superpower is the way all these pieces fit together. It is the synergy. It is the cascading, self-reinforcing feedback loop that, once it started, became the most powerful evolutionary force this planet has ever seen. You can see the cascade unfold in the story we've told. It began with the social revolution. The patient, intelligent work of gathering, supported by the multi-generational cooperation of grandmothers, created a stable and reliable food supply. This social safety net allowed for the invention of the home base and the radical act of food sharing. This was the foundation, the stable platform upon which everything else could be built. That social platform then enabled the technological revolution. The safety and time afforded by a stable society allowed you to invent simple stone tools to unlock the scavenger's niche, and then, most critically, to tame fire. In a quirky but accurate sense, you became the first cyborg, offloading the biological work of digestion to an external technology, the campfire. This technology then ignited a biological revolution. The cooked, high-energy and easily digestible food that fire provided remade your very body. It allowed your gut to shrink and freed up a massive amount of metabolic energy that was rerouted to build a larger, more complex and more powerful brain. Your culture was now literally building your biology. This new brain, in turn, unleashed the cognitive revolution. Housed in a deeply social, cooperative primate, it developed the capacity for abstract thought, allowing you to see a hand axe in a shapeless stone. It developed a theory of mind and the first stirrings of language, allowing you to coordinate your actions in ways no other species could. And this new mind allowed you to deploy the ultimate predatory strategy, the patient, intelligent, cooperative ambush. This is the very definition of the mainstream scientific fact known as gene-culture coevolution. Your culture, your tools, your fire, your social rules changed your genes by creating the conditions that favored a bigger brain. And that bigger brain then allowed you to create an even more complex culture. It's a perpetual engine, a feedback loop that resolves the old, tired nature versus nurture debate by showing that it was never a competition. They are two parts of the same system, a dance that has been going on for 2 million years. Your true superpower, then, is the Cascade itself. It is the uniquely human ability to weave social cooperation, technological innovation, and individual intelligence into a single, unstoppable force. We did not outfight or outrun the other animals. We out-cooperated and out-thought our way to the top of the food chain. We are not the strongest, or the fastest, or the toughest species on the planet. We are the species that learned how to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. And so our long journey through the deep past comes to a gentle close. The echoes of the hunt, the ghosts of the savannah, now fade into the quiet of your room. The challenges and triumphs of those ancient ancestors, their fears and their innovations, have all led to this moment of stillness, of rest. The incredible cascading superpower that they built, piece by piece over 1 million years, is now quiet within you. It is the legacy that allows you to lie down in safety, in a world they could never have imagined, free from the predators of the long-gone night. The fire at the center of their world has become the soft glow of a distant street lamp, a sign that the watch is kept. The urgent, high-stakes problems of their time have dissolved, leaving only the gentle task of letting go of the day. All that is left to do now is to breathe, to feel the slow, steady rhythm that connects you back through all those generations, a rhythm of rest and recovery. The story is over. It's time now to just be still and to drift into a peaceful and well-earned sleep.